Hey friends, welcome to the Fireside. What you are about to watch and or listen to is an Inside Fireside Technique Talk. If you're not familiar with Technique Talks, they are one of our monthly events that we host in the Inside Fireside Tattoo Club. Inside Fireside is a group of tattooers who work together to hone our skills and become better artists. And the difference between a Technique Talk and a traditional podcast that you've probably seen me do before is that the technique talks tend to go a little deeper into working processes, materials, things like that of the artists that we're interviewing. So we're a podcast. We might just talk about any random topic. We're a little more dialed in on the technique talks, trying to tease out the things that make the artists that we're interviewing, tease out the things that make them unique. Second thing that is pretty different about Technique Talks is that it's not just me and the artist having a conversation. You'll notice our entire Inside Fireside Club is welcome to join and jump in on the conversation, ask questions, share ideas, and things like that. So it's really a pretty unique thing. I've really enjoyed it. It's probably my favorite thing that we do in the Inside Fireside Tattoo Club. But if you would like to be a part of the club, or if you'd like to jump in on these conversations with us, you're welcome to join. We would love to have you. We do a ton of fun stuff. I won't go into it here. I will leave a link or a card or something. You'll be able to find out more about the Inside Fireside Club. There's no obligation to it. You can join 1 month, and if it's not for you, you can ditch it the next month. But anyways, I hope you enjoy this technique talk, and I'll see you at the end. Do you have some stuff in particular you think you want to share? Do you want me to go through and pull up anything, pull up Instagram or your website or any of that to share?
Honestly, dude, I have stuff to talk about.
That'd be great.
It's kind of weird because I was thinking about the idea of techniques, you know what I mean, and technique talk, you know what I mean, and I started to really kind of investigate what is technique, what do and honestly it's a culmination of a lot of your influences you obviously affect your technique. And so I thought the honest thing to do would just be to come in and just share influences from my art career, I guess, up to this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have photos I can share. I have books. I collected a lot of stuff, around. I tried to kind of pin down most of my big influences ever since I was 5 or 6 years old, all the way up until current time. So
That's
what I mean?
awesome.
I have a whole plethora to kind of go through.
Okay.
If I need to do a demo, I have a there's times where I was in art school. There's a couple little things I can share. Um, Little things that I've learned that might help the community out a little bit. And Yeah, man. So I
Yeah.
have a bunch of stuff.
Man, that sounds great. Perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
I never know. Some people come in, they're just like, no, whatever you want to talk about. And so I'll go through and kind of go through their portfolio. But it's always much better if someone comes in with a plan and
Yeah, I'm
knows what
trying.
they
I
want to
want
do.
to make sure that I have content, you know what I mean? And I know artists are visual people. And so the most I can, the more video, photos, books I can share, I think that resonates more with people than just me sitting here and explaining what I'm doing. I think it's, technique, for example, the easiest way to learn technique is oh, well, just surround yourself with good artists. It's oh, yeah, that's really nice to
Hmm.
say that, but most people who start don't have that opportunity. You know what I mean? So most of it, and so basically, what I did is I kind of broke down technique, and the idea of I kind of broke it down into three general areas of technique, and one is self-learned technique, right? That's the first one we all experience, right? This is for me comic books as a kid, and you know, uh, not knowing how to draw, but emulating these people, for whatever reason. But I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just, I like an artist and I'm trying to redraw what they're drawing or put my own spin in it or something. Um, and then the second would be learn technique. And learn technique is not everybody experiences that, but the point in which you kind of observe your own work and you compare it to others and you go, well, mine doesn't quite look the same as everybody else. So what do I do? Well, I went to school, you know what I mean? So that would be considered learning technique. And then the last is working technique. And that is when you're finally in a studio, you're hanging out with other artists, and that's when you're working around other people doing the exact same thing you're doing, and you're sharing all these things with each other, and that's where you get the most kind of I don't know, like uptick, in your work. So I figured maybe I could break down like each one in certain ways, and kind of share those with your community, and maybe it might help them out in a certain way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I love that breakdown. Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. Yeah, absolutely true. Like, especially that. What did you call the first one? Unlearn. What's the unlearn
The first
technique?
one I would consider self-learned technique, right?
Self-learn. Okay, I'm gonna write that down. Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is like you're just
You're
simply
just
like
copying what you trying
yeah,
to
you're kind of
copy the things.
for me it was comic books. So
Mhm.
for an example, I can show you real quick. I'm going to switch my camera here.
Okay.
Um, so when I was younger, these are honestly the first three comic books that I ever had as a child, right? I was probably 5 or 6 years old,
Yeah.
and I still have these, and they were so influential in my career. And I know this is Rob Liefeld, if anybody's wondering. And I know Rob Liefeld kind of gets like a little bit of flack, from the Deadpool movies and stuff, that he couldn't draw feet and all these things. But man, is a 5 or 6 year old kid, these were huge, to
Yeah.
me. And I must have read these things like a million times, and I kept them, from my whole life. And so I kind of, when I knew we were going to do this, I kind of took the time to kind of try and go through some old boxes and find stuff. But then,
Yeah. Yeah.
obviously, I'm a child of the 80s, you know what I mean, and 90s. And so maybe I'm getting a little too ahead of myself. Hang on one second. Um, so for people who don't know who I am, my name's Corey Bernhardt. I'm a 44-year-old tattoo artist, business owner. I own my own tattoo shop called Neon Tiger in Sacramento, and I guess I've been making art and getting paid for it for probably about 23 years or so in various forms. I never, ever in a million years thought I would tattoo. It just was never. I thought I was going to be a comic book illustrator. I thought I was going to, draw, buff dudes in tights, and capes and stuff. That's kind of the way I started. But then, as things kind of move on, you realize that like, well, that's like trying to get into the NBA. You know what I mean? It's pretty difficult. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But so yeah, I've been basically drawing and making art in various ways for about 23 years. And then I've been tattooing for, I don't know, about between 16, 17 years, somewhere around there. And then almost 13 of those I've owned a business, which is a tattoo shop in Sacramento, California. Um, and so yeah, so
Is
just for
Howie is Howie in Sacramento? Howie Horowitz? Does he work out of Sacramento? Is that wrong?
I don't
Oh
know
no,
who he
a
is,
lot
but
of
I know,
okay.
you had who was it? Matt Driscoll was on
Yeah.
before, and I
Hmm.
was like, man, why do I gotta follow up Matt Driscoll, dude? He's so awesome. But
Yeah, he's
he
great. Yeah.
he he actually tattoos a buddy of mine at another tattoo shop probably about a mile away, and so I've gotten to see kind of his work in real time in various stages, and it's really cool.
Yeah.
Sacramento's such a cool city, full of there's so many tattoo shops here, it's ridiculous. And surprisingly, throughout my career, or at least in the industry, we've all been kind of getting closer and closer together as a group. You know what I mean? We host various art nights at different shops. We have kind of a like an Instagram kind of thread where a shop will come out and be like, hey, we're going to do an art night here. We'll all kind of go over to one shop, or I'll host one at the shop or whatever, and then we all try and kind of keep somebody will do an art event, and then we'll all try and participate, everyone at the shop. And it's good to have deadlines. I feel like that's a really good thing to help your career. I've had there's so many like paintings that just sit in my studio that are left undone kind of, and I've been painting on one or two of them for honestly like years, just because I don't have like an actual deadline, you know what I mean? And you don't realize that like deadlines are so helpful. They're really they really inform you, you know what I mean? Well, they keep you moving and keep you forcing you to finish work, you know what I mean?
Sure.
um so yeah, so um yeah, so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to think. So yeah, that's a little bit about myself, and then basically, you know, usually when I listen to interviews from artists that I like or whatever, the first thing I always ask is like, what are the tools you're using? You know, which
Hmm.
is a weird question because like it doesn't really the tools. You know, we all know that the tools don't really um
Yeah.
like actually like make you a better artist somehow. You know, sometimes they do, but for the most part, they don't really. But you're always interested. So I don't know if I can share my screen, and I thought I would bring up just some pictures of like my setup, the machines I
Yeah.
use, my
Yeah,
inks.
definitely.
You know what I mean?
Y-
Just share with your community and just be like, this is
Yeah,
what I use.
if
See, so real quick, this is just the shop in general. Can you guys see this?
hmm Yes.
Okay,
Oh
cool.
yeah.
So this is Neon Tiger, and this is just kind of I collect a lot of art, and I try and keep like the artwork kind of centered over each artist. This
Yeah.
is the drawing area in the back, and some of the banners are missing because like Dave Barnett's was at a convention. He was at the Utah convention, I think. Let's see here.
Yeah, that's a great little
Um,
drawing area. How many artists do you have? How many stations?
there's 6 stations total, and I have 5 artists right now.
Gotcha.
So it's Mike Mumbles or Mike Mace Manson, David Barnett's, Jessica White, and Christopher Yoakum.
Yeah.
Um, and so basically, so this is my setup generally. I'm kind of the first one you see when you walk in the door. And the reason why I chose that, I've worked at other shops where like the owner of the shop always just like is in the very back, you know what I mean, of the studio, and I always kind of, I was like, oh, I guess that maybe that's the way you do it. And then a good friend of mine, Billy, who owns a handful of restaurants and stuff in Sacramento, he owned a sushi place that we would go all the time. And when you would walk in the door, he was the first person you saw when you walked in. And I always thought that was really cool. He didn't hide from anybody. He didn't try and stay away from any, the front desk, And so I'm the first station you see when you walk in, and that way I can kind of monitor and help people and, kind of facilitate stuff. We don't have like a front desk person or whatever. We're
Mm.
basically a private studio. We're not generally open to the public. We have like a doorbell system basically. So you hit the doorbell, we see you on a camera, and then we let you in if it's
Yeah.
you have an appointment, and if you don't, then you don't, and then we don't.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
this is my general setup. Um, and I'm a big fan of the dip cap. I don't know if you guys use dip cap,
I
but
use
I really
yeah,
like it.
I use them all the
Some
time.
people get annoyed by it, you know what I mean? Like they don't know how to use it, and but once you kind of get the hang of it, it's such a good tool.
Yeah.
The machines I use are pretty simple. I use Dan Cuban machines. Let me see if I can find a. Let's see. Let me see if I can make this a little bigger for you guys.
With that dip cat, I take it out of the package, cut it into four pieces and put the other three in like a Ziploc bag. And then I use the cap as my rinse cup. And then I just have this
What?
little wedge. I have a little wedge of the dip cap and I just kind of flip it with my machine so I can use all sides and corners of it to clean. And so
Oh, that's smart.
one dip cap lasts me for like four tattoos.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I honestly, I just put a
Just
couple,
use it.
put a little bit of water in it and
Yeah.
squish it down a little bit and then go for it. I'm a big
Yeah.
fan of the Dan Cubans. I've gone through, I mean, and obviously we can talk about this later, but I've been through kind of all three, what I would consider like big adjustments within the tattoo industry. The first was like pre and post autoclave. The second I would say is pre and post cartridge pen machines, and the third is pre and post iPad. Those are the three things that I feel like were major changes within the tattoo community.
Yeah.
And experimenting with all of those, I've kind of come full circle, and I really enjoy the hybrid Cuban machines. I feel like you get, a lot of residual feedback from the machine. You can hear it. It's very visceral. I compare it very much to like driving an automatic or driving a stick shift. It's like,
Mhm.
an automatic will get you to work. It's fine. It does exactly what you need it to do. But, sometimes people enjoy driving and they want to, shift gears while they drive, and they feel more connected to the car and the road and all those things. So those were that's the way I kind of came full circle. So Now Dan's machines, you can kind of use for various things. Some can be used for liners and shaders. I use my Sidewinder, the top one for my big liners, anywhere from 9 to 14 liners, and the 46er I use for my small liners, 5, 7 liners, and then my Mojo box, which that Mojo box was, I think I bought in 2019 or 18 or something. It never pushed cartridges, and then I sent it in and had them put a new motor in it, and now it's just a beast, and it runs everything. And so usually I'll use that for either tight liners, for quick touch-ups, where I use like liner cartridges, and and obviously all my shading. Both the
Hmm.
Sidewinder, and the 46er and the 7.5, I use needle on bar. I just think it's a superior liner, from in my experience. So yeah, so that's kind of how I do it. And then let me see, I'll show you. Let me
Do you use
see.
the Swift? Is it called Swift Tip? The
I
Swift Tip
haven't
system
tried
that
it
he
yet.
has? I haven't
I haven't
either.
tried the Swift tips, but I do have his the big brass grips that he has.
Yeah.
Um and that's I like those, but they don't fit every cartridge. Let me see if I can find what's the other one. So yeah, and this is my cartridge drawer. Basically my liners are in a different drawer. I just use needle on bar. They're black claw, like standard liners. um so nothing special there. I typically use, from the far left, those are black claw medium taper. I use those for color. And from the bottom up, it's like 7, 9, 11, 13, and 19. And then one over, I use quadrant long taper for black and gray. And that's 7, 13, and 19. And then after that, the next one is the white ones. And those are T-Tex, and I use those as for round shaders. The top two are round shaders, and at the bottom I use, if I need a tight liner, then I'll grab like I have a tight 5 at the bottom there.
I
And
haven't thought of
then
T-Tac in so long. I used to use nothing but T-Tac, and then for some reason they
I
worked. I
know.
don't know.
You
Yeah.
know what's funny is I tried to go back to using their shaders, and the cartridge itself, it has these wide kind of edges, and so it's a little harder to kind of see where you're at. My wife uses T-Tex jaw tattoos. She uses them all the time, and she loves them. And I tried to, but I really like the round shaders, so that's what I use. And then the last, second to last, these are Tatsul traditional liners, and I use these for touch-ups typically. And I know I'm a weirdo. I always have somebody come back for a touch-up, and I know that's probably kind of maybe, a lot of people are like, ah, you don't need touch-ups. Let them let you know if they need a touch-up. And for me, I call it like a tip only session. And I just want to see my work healed, when it's fully done, and have them come
Yeah.
in. And they very rarely have I ever had a client come in for a touch-up that doesn't need one. There's always something I can do. And
Yeah.
I think it really improves the tattoo. It just, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just the way I do it. The
And the
last
relationship, right? I mean, like just the fact that you were willing to donate a little extra time just to make sure it's as good as it could be.
Absolutely. It goes a
Yeah.
long way with customers. I think it's like, come in for an hour. Come in for an hour. I'm not going to charge you, but I do call it like a tip only session. So you tip what you feel, but let me spend a quick, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, just cleaning some stuff up. And if there's a little bit of things aren't saturated completely, and I can hit those things. If I want to glaze things with other colors really quickly, I can do that. The thing that I'm really into right now is these Black Claw disposable stems. I don't know if
Mm.
you guys have seen these through the Black Claw. It's the very right there. And so basically, I've been
Mm.
using those with needle on bar. It's an aluminum disposable stem, basically, that you can put into, your grip, a one
Mhm.
inch or 1.25 grip. And I just feel like they're, once you use one, it's really hard to go back to lining
Hmm.
with cartridges and things like that. I don't know. It's a really,
I'll look them
is a
up.
game changer for me. They're awesome. I
Okay.
don't think they have a, yeah, the three, so it's 3, 5, 7, and 9. And the stems themselves are a little bigger than what a conventional liner would be. So a 3 you can put a 5 liner in. A 5 I'll put a 7. A 7 I'll put a 9, and a 9 I'll put an 11 and I think it will push a 14, but I rarely use 14 liners. Um,
Gotcha. Huh, okay.
so yeah, just to share that. And then as far as inks, this is my ink drawer. I tend to flip all my bottles over just because I want to see, having the tops of all um, your ink bottles in there are kind of, it's hard to see what all the colors are. So I flip them over so I can see the swatches. And then from left to right, obviously I kind of wrote down in the bottom. So this is the same way I treat like oil, pigments and any kind of pigments that I use. Um, I try and kind of experiment with all of them, and then I'll start to pick and choose colors that I feel like are just superior colors to other colors, or maybe certain variations of colors that another brand won't use. Right now, I'm really into the Karasumi lineup. I really like Karasumi. Um, and I've been using Karasumi for the past, I don't know, two years or so. And they've been awesome. I really like all their pigments. But then, obviously there's just eternal colors that I can't get away from, Um, so from the bottom left, it would be like, I think there's jade, and then above that is gangrene. Above that is like harvest gold, and some of these other colors. And I've just kind of, and then obviously the second aisle after that, from left to right, that would be world famous. And I use just a handful of world famous colors. Um, and for the most part, everything is Karasumi that I use. And then as far as lining and my black and gray shading, I stick to dynamic, and I really like whatever their true black is right now. I've even really using that a
Like
lot,
the
and I like it.
like the triple black or something like that, or just
Yeah,
the
it's like
regular?
their version. I don't know what they call it. Every brand has
Yeah,
like a,
yeah, like a black. Yeah,
exactly.
gotcha.
So yeah, so I think for your that's pretty much it. For your viewers, I think let me see here. Can I go back?
How did you just do a lot of experimentation to come to those? Because obviously you have certain colors that you like from different brands. Did you do just a ton of experimentation, or you stumbled onto a few and just said, okay, that's a keeper, that's a keeper? Like, were you using, like, say, just Eternal only for a period of time, or have you
Yep.
always been someone who just jumped around
Yeah.
and just tested different brands?
Well, so when I first started tattooing, this was like back, I don't know, 2007 or something. Fusion was like the big thing. Everybody
Hmm.
was like fusion, 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 and I used it, and I just, after over time, I'd order a color, I get it, it wouldn't be the same color I ordered, or it would be the same name of the pigment, but it would be slightly off in tone, and it was really annoying.
Yeah.
So that kind of pushed me into other directions, and at the time, I was working with Heidi Ellis. Heidi Ellis was my mentor, and she was working with Jeff Gogway quite a bit. She was going up and doing like seminars with him. I mean, obviously she was in Roseville, Jeff's in Grants Pass. So she'd go up and hang out and then come back and be like, "Oh, well, Jeff said to use this, so we're using this." That was kind of the way it was. And then the more you have a little bit more disposable income, you can kind of start to experiment with like different brands. And so from Fusion, I went to Eternal, I went to Solid to World Famous to Karasumi, and then I've just really been into Karasumi.
Hmm.
I think Karasumi's awesome. And
Yeah.
I like their bottles too. They're like square, and they're in like weird off sizes. It's like 0.75 and then 1.25, and
Hmm.
and that's pretty much, the 1.25 is like all you need. The only thing I
Hmm.
don't like is that certain colors that I do like, you have to buy in a set. You can't buy them individually.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of that. And so I showed. I'm trying to kind of
Yeah.
keep myself.
And anyone, if you guys have questions along the way, feel free to either just jump in, or if you don't want to say anything out loud, throw it in the chat, and I'll read them out loud if you want. Whatever you guys want to do. Um, yeah, another thing I was gonna ask on the inks, have you found any of the inks not like playing well together, like not mixing well together? Or I don't know if you do a lot of dipping back and forth and mixing in the tube.
S-
Um, do you find that happening much?
Yeah, some of them do, but not these. The ones that I'm telling tend to mix pretty well together. There was, and I'm trying to remember the brand. It was Old Gold. Do you remember Old Gold?
Hmm. Hmm.
So Old Gold definitely was one that you could mix Old Gold with Old Gold. The idea would be to kind of like this, pour a little bit in this and shake it up and then, kind of do your thing. I don't know what the ingredients were, but it definitely would take a long time to kind of when you're mixing with a shader, it would take a little bit of time to do its thing. And so I like the palette that Old Gold had, but it was really hard to use them in conjunction with everything else, and so I just kind of stayed away from them. I did buy the whole set at one point, but I used them very briefly, and probably just gave them to somebody else in the shop or something to use.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Are you you were talking about your gray washes. Are you buying pre-mixed grays? Or are you using dynamic to to do drop method
Oh
gray
no, I can't
washes?
I can't do the drop method, man. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like
Hmm.
everybody does that, and there's a couple guys at the shop that do it, and I just if for some reason it's just like phew, it's like over my head. I can't. I like and I only use the 20, the 60 and solid black. I don't I used to pour out, like when Fusion had their whole gray wash set, I would use every version of gray wash, and then everything seemed to look very mid-tone, it didn't
Hmm.
seem to be. So I think, in my opinion, it's like lightest light, medium, and darkest
Yeah.
dark. You know what I mean? That's all you
Yeah.
need. And if you need something a variation, you can mix it. It's not like it's
Hmm.
not too hard to do. I know that some people too mix white into their gray washes. I've used that a couple times. I don't really notice the difference, in my opinion. But maybe I'm not
Yeah.
doing it right. you know?
Yeah, I do use a whitewash series a decent amount. I use one from Raw. I used to use the one from Empire, and I anything medium gray, medium and dark, you can't tell at all. As you get into the lighter, side of it, the light and extra light, you can see it in the skin just while it's fresh. When it heals, it doesn't heal really any differently, but I do think that I
Mm.
can see the level of. I feel like it gives you the tendency to want to pack gray like you would pack color. You know what I mean? It kind of
Oh,
like
okay.
instead of washing it in, it makes you kind of want to pack washes in just because you can see it, as you're moving through. But then when it heals, it heals out, and there's really no evidence of white that I can tell. In fact, I've experimented with it by doing, like in a black and gray tattoo, doing like the bird in the foreground using white washes and doing the background using gray washes. And then
Hmm.
when they heal, it's just like, you can't, yeah, it's really no
Can't
difference.
tell.
Nah,
I've
not really.
never I've never tried like whitewashes. That's a cool concept. I'll have to
Yeah,
try that.
there's a few. Empire makes one. Like I said, I use raw pigments. They make one. I think quite a few companies do now. But like I said, anything below like their meat, like with raw, they have an extra light, a medium, a dark. So they have it's a four wash system. So only the bottom two can you even really tell. Medium and dark, you can't really even tell it's doing
Yeah,
anything.
that's kind of the same way with even the dynamic stuff. It just seemed like, the difference between like 40 and 60 didn't seem too much of a difference. But so I had to kind of go like the lightest light, the medium, and black. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and honestly, I try and do most of my work. I try and let the color do a lot of the work, to a certain degree. I do so when I tattoo, I try and oh, somebody's hands up. What's that?
Oh, yeah. Go
Not
ahead.
try
Sorry, Nicole.
not trying to interrupt. Jake, I was just looking for some clarity on what you mean by whitewashes.
Oh, it's like gray washes with actual like little like drops of white pigment in them.
So it's not quite an opaque gray, is
It's
what he's
not
saying.
opaque. Yeah, it's not
Gotcha.
opaque
Yeah.
gray.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll pull you guys go ahead. I'll pull them up over here as we're talking, and I'll show you
That's
what
what I
what the
thought you meant, but I wasn't certain. I
yeah.
haven't heard it like that, so yeah.
That's kind
Yeah.
of what yeah, I'm glad you clarified because I was kind of thinking the same thing. But yeah, I know that they're doing mixtures with a little bit of white in them. So they're not quite like like an opaque gray. They're somewhere between a gray wash and an opaque, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think the purpose of the white is just that it knocks back. If you're using a super light gray wash, the irritation of the skin is more intense than the color itself. So you end up kind of with that splotchiness. It settles
Hmm.
that splotchiness out just with the little bit of white. Um, but I was going to try to pull it up here, but yeah, that's just what they call it is whitewash. I was gonna here. Oh, I was sorry, Corey, you're sharing. Go ahead. Okay, yeah, go ahead. I can show it later
Oh
on.
wait, am I still sharing my screen? Can you
You're
guys see
sharing
that?
your, yeah, but do you want to keep going with your what you were,
Oh yeah, I mean I don't
or do you have
no.
anything else you want to
Well, I
show?
mean I have like other like other stuff that if you guys are
Okay.
interested, stuff that is let me see if I can find it. I I try and avoid procrastination by trying to put different studios in different places that I frequent the most. So
Hmm.
obviously so let me see if I can find it here. So this is where I genuinely would do a lot of my work at the studio.
Yeah.
And then I have my studio here at home that's upstairs in my house that I do a lot of drawing and stuff too. And then I have a shed in my backyard that I do a lot of my painting and stuff. So
Hmm.
I try and like keep myself in different you see my cheesy mall stick set up there.
Hmm.
Uh, but I try and make sure that the places that I frequent the most, that I have no excuses, that I have, the ability to draw or paint somewhere. And so I didn't take a picture of this studio where I'm at right now, but so
So
yeah,
yeah,
and
that's a good idea. So you always have there's always something to work on. It's like a guitar player having a guitar in every room.
yeah. So
Yeah.
like if you feel the need to do it, then it's there and it's available. So I try and keep a lot of the same supplies in each section, and that way, I don't get too bogged down by procrastination. But obviously, I think I'm definitely procrastination
Hmm.
is a tough it's a tough thing to follow. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's
Yeah.
sorry. I'll go back to
Yeah.
let me see if I
Yeah.
can.
I will show while we're here real quick, I'll show you guys real quick what I'm talking about, Nicole. The difference. They're essentially can you guys see where I am here?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so they have gray wash sets and whitewash sets. And what you'll really notice is in the whitewash sets, as they settle, there'll be this. If we were at my studio, I could show you, but the white will settle to the bottom completely. So it'll look like a gray wash with just like white sitting at the bottom. So you really have to shake them up a lot. But it's still gray wash. It's just gray wash with the slightest bit of opacity. So
Mhm.
you can try them out sometime. They're worth trying. But yeah, they are
So
still washes. It's not opaque.
people really like that method. They feel like
Mhm.
their black and gray is a lot softer,
Yeah.
somehow. But I don't think my ratios were accurate, so I'll definitely have to give those a try and see if I can
Yeah. But
works.
do you do a lot of finished black and gray stuff, or do you mostly end up rendering it in color?
I do, but I never post it.
Okay, got you.
Like so I try and only post the things that I want in return.
Yeah.
That's really the thing is. So I do a ton of stuff that clearly is not. I don't post. I mean, I do murals, and I don't
Hmm.
post those because I don't want everybody hit me up for a mural. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? I try and when it comes to like mural work, I only do them for just a handful of people around Sacramento, and they're good friends of mine, and there's Sacramento is full of just amazing mural artists. I'm like, I don't want to be a jack of all trades, is what I'm trying to say.
Hmm.
I really
Yeah.
want to, right now my focus is, tattooing and oil painting. And
Yeah.
that's it, but I do, and I can share some of those photos of murals I've done if you guys are interested. But
I'd love to see some of your murals. Yeah, I love your
yeah,
paintings so much. Yeah, that'd be great.
sweet. These are
Um,
now, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. You could. I was gonna make a comment that I forgot to make earlier. You were talking about having folks in for a touch-up session each time, and I've always been impressed at how often you're able to get healed photos of your work. You post so many healed shots. I'm like, man, I don't know
Yeah,
how he gets so many healed shots, and that's it, right? Like they come back for the touch-up, and you can get the photos
it's
right
exactly
there.
it.
Yeah, I love that. It stands. It's funny. It stands out in that you take photos that look like tattoos in the real world. They're like healed tattoos in your studio.
Yep.
There you don't have like a ton of controlled lighting and like filters and super saturation and all that. It just looks like the
Well,
tattoo.
yeah, well, one, I'm not the best at taking photos, to be honest. But number two, I've been in the game long enough to know that some people take pictures for the, some people tattoo for the promo pictures, and some people tattoo for the longevity of the tattoo. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but I've definitely seen it on both ends. I've definitely seen work from top artists whose work does not heal good. You know what I mean? And it's like clear that like their motivation is the photo. It's not the actual longevity of the tattoo. And my in you know, I'm more focused on, you know, making sure that this tattoo is going to hold up the best I can. It's not about promoting my, you know, my Instagram,
Brand.
you know, or
Yeah.
something, you know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Can you share a few things? I'd love to
Yeah,
see some of the, and if,
sure. I mean,
go ahead.
sorry. Yeah. So, can you see my desktop now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I think I'm figuring this out. So now, so this is the recent one I did. It's for a restaurant called Chu Mai, and it's
Oh,
a
nice.
like it's a and I did this is kind of my shtick is flowers with birds with
Hmm.
flowers for heads. It's just kind of something that I was interested in. I love like surreal imagery and all that stuff. So
Hmm? 2570. Oh, okay.
Oh, somebody's not muted.
I'm
I don't know
muted.
who.
It's good.
Okay, go ahead. All right, go ahead, Corey.
uh,
Sorry.
sorry, bud. So all of this, I don't know how to use graffiti. I it was just something I really didn't, you know, do a lot and just didn't invest the time. So most of this is all done. Well, all of it is done with just sample colors from your local Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever. You know, I just go in there and I make some young kid's life miserable that he has to, you know, mix you know, 25 colors for me, you know. And so yeah, so that was just a couple months ago. And
Nice.
then let's see, today we were at this restaurant this morning. This is
Oh,
in
wow.
2019.
Fuck.
This is the whatever you call it, the waiting area before you get your table. This is for another one of my buddy Billy's restaurants. And who I'm talking about is Billy Nago. He's a I think he's been on like Chopped and a handful of things on TV and stuff, and he's
Mm.
just a fantastic dude, and his whole staff is awesome. And I've tattooed him quite a bit, and you know, he always thinks of me for all these projects, and I'm like, man, there's so many other cool guys who do this like for a living. Like, why, you know, why me? You know what I mean? But at the same time, I really like it, and I think we've gotten to, you know, he kind of gives me a little bit more leadway on stuff. So yeah, so there's
Yeah,
that, and
that's
I kind
fantastic.
of
Love
the
it. Yeah.
so he wanted like a nine-tail fox. That was kind of I also helped him brand the restaurant. So it's called Kodaiko. And so I helped him, you know, just make the logo for Kodaiko, and then I did some murals, and so yeah. And then
Yeah. Yeah.
Crew
Wow.
is a really big restaurant in Sacramento. It's a big sushi restaurant, and this was done. Let me see if this was in 2014. It's strange. It's in a hallway where the bathrooms are, so you can kind of
Mm.
see there's where you would wash your hands. And I tried to make it to where when you were in you know, when you were washing your hands, that basically the main subject matter and it was kind of staring you back in the face, you know. The original pitch was actually to have one of the fish in the, well, actually, there was a lot more to this mural, but you know, when you do mural work and you know, they're like, oh, we have this budget and we want all this stuff, and then you come up with the art, and then towards when they're, you know, towards when the restaurant's getting done and they want you to come in and finish, they go, oh, well, we don't have the budget we used to, and you know, we
Mm.
want to change these things, and you know, and so things get changed on the fly quite a bit, and so it's frustrating, but you kind of just have to kind of work with it. Originally, it was more there was going to be a heron, and there was going to be you know you know, a bunch of other figures and stuff, and then it just ended up, you know, we just didn't have the time and the budget for it, so we kind of settled on this. And also the heron was supposed to have um its beak kind of piercing through one of the fish, right? And the idea was that you know, kind of like sushi, you know what I mean? It would be,
Mhm.
you know, when you have a lot of investors, sometimes those investors will come back and go, it's a little on the nose, and it seems a little, you know, we don't want to see
Mm.
a fish getting stabbed in our restaurant. And I'm like, but that's what you guys do, you know what I mean? So there's, you know, it's strange, but at the end of the day, it's cool. And same thing, this is just straight, you know, sample paint. Whoop, I'm sorry, guys.
Oh, yeah, that's perfect. Oh, yeah.
Turn the
So you're
this is
you're literally going to Home Depot and choose. So you're laying all this stuff out, I guess on an iPad or something first, and
Mhm.
creating a color palette, and then how are you transitioning that to swatches at home? Is it like a custom mix at Home Depot, or you're
Mhm.
just like, okay.
Yeah, kind of. Basically, I'll just do swatches on like in Photoshop, basically, and then print that out, and then try and get colors that kind of meet up with those swatches,
Hmm.
um, and then yeah, and then I try and keep the color palette pretty simple, like maybe 3 to 5 colors per element. Try not to get too into the weeds, with those things, so yeah,
Do they
and then
blend okay when are you blending them out like you
it's a
would?
lot,
Like what?
surprisingly. Let me see if I can find like kind of an example here. Sorry. You can see that a lot of it is, if you guys are familiar with like dry brushing, so a lot of it you can kind of see in the fish. You could see towards where it goes from red to gray. You could see I've kind of just same thing with like whip shading when you're doing a tattoo, right? I'm just kind of whipping it out and trying to, and I can kind of blend colors a little bit. The idea is that I'm trying not to get too much in the weeds. I'm trying to keep it really simple. People aren't going to stand, in a hallway when they're trying to use the restroom and really, examine every part of a mural. You just want to kind of hit them with the biggest subject matter, and really the emphasis is the food. It's not really the artwork so much. So I'm trying to kind of, this is Milagro. This was way
Uh-huh.
back. This is a long time ago. This was used to be another restaurant that Billy had, but was then taken over during COVID. They closed it down, and another business took it over. But they kept the mural, which was
Huh.
cool. And
Yeah.
so this is a squid. This, yeah,
Wow.
Yeah.
2017. And so yeah, so it's kind of trying to, it's interesting. Um, I was thankful that they just kept it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
So
fantastic.
it's
Yeah.
it's crazy. Yeah, there's a couple other ones that I've done, but I just don't have pictures of it. Another
Oh
octopus
yeah.
that I did, and stuff like that. But you get the idea.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Um,
super, super cool. Yeah. And are you, I guess you're, as far as getting it, you're projecting it onto the wall basically, or you're doing,
in
and
various
that,
forms, it's weird.
are
So
you,
the one with the heron and the red fish,
hmm.
that honestly I couldn't project
Oh
it on the
yeah. It's
wall.
the hallway, right?
So
Yeah.
yeah, and I didn't know how to do it. You know what I mean? So the only thing I can think of was I went to FedEx Kinko's and I printed out each individual fish and I put it
Wow.
on these big, huge sheets of paper. And I took Saral paper and me and my wife got up on ladders and we taped them to the wall. And then we just held Saral on both sides and we would trace it out and move the Saral down, trace it out again, move it down, trace it out. And then a lot of the other stuff is just off the cuff, just going like all the waves and all that stuff. It's
Yeah.
it's
Just
just
winging it.
I just did it. You know what I mean? And it's
Mm.
I think I would have much rather it'd have been nice if I had more more structured, you know what I mean? Instead of doing, because I don't, like I don't typically draw waves exactly like that. You know what I mean? Japanese waves are always a kind of a
Hmm.
signature thing. It just sometimes you're limited by the tools. You're using a 1 inch brush, a 2 inch brush. It's really difficult to get
You
things
want
like
the
really
pizza?
detailed like that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
I'll heat it
Dan,
up and I'll
had your
bring it
hand
up
up.
to you. Are you
Hold
okay?
on a second.
Someone, so yeah, let's say someone's not muted again.
It's
What
good,
you
I
had a
think.
question, Dan?
So there's a question in the chat from Monica. She sort of wants to hear one of your frogs,
Oh
or
yeah, she put it in the chat.
any of your frogs really, sort of like a walkthrough, like a conceptual from the conceptual phase to, how you sort of go about.
It's funny you mentioned frog because I've had it sitting. I've had your
Oh
Instagram up,
yeah.
and it's been playing this over and over in front of
Oh
me for
man.
the last. So go ahead.
I think
Sorry.
it's that one,
It's so
actually.
funny.
I think it's that one, yeah.
Is it? No, that's funny.
So many people really like the time lapse stuff.
Yeah.
Honestly, I try not to take on any artwork that I can't draw. And I really want to draw everything. And tracing, I will trace certain things I have, and I have current projects that I've traced with usually those are come with clients that want very specific things. And so you're kind of giving them exactly what they want. Other people understand that I like to anthropomorphize animals. That's something that I've always liked. One of the artists that really struck me doing it was Matt Lambden.
Mm.
who did my one side of my neck, and he always like anthropomorphized a lot of his animals, and I just really enjoyed it. Also, tons of other artists, but I come from a background of like storytelling. I was really into comic books and movies like The Secret of Nim and Rockadoodle and all that stuff from as a kid. And they were always anthropomorphized animals, and so I just feel like and you could really tell stories, and I think that's a good way of like approaching a design is when I'm drawing something, I'm thinking of a story, and it might not be very specific, but I know that this when I'm drawing something, it has to be grounded within um something. So I'm trying to, I have to have a like for my paintings, for example, it's like in my mind, I think that they all reside in the same universe. So whatever I'm painting or even some of my tattoos that I'm sharing, I would like to think that they all exist in the same universe. And so that gives me a platform to design things from. Um, so that helps me a lot, when it comes to kind of the design process. Is like as I'm designing something, or it's just various things that a client will give me, and then I have to figure out how to kind of make it work. Like one, and some people will get crazy with it. I had a client of mine a couple months ago, and he said, I want a gunslinger badger. And I'm like,
Mm.
what? I had another client of mine who's he's a Michelin star chef, and he said, I want an octopus playing drums out of vegetables, like vegetable drums. And I was
Huh.
like, you got it. That's awesome. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And it's
wow. Yeah.
I love it. I think that's so cool, and it gives if it really makes people kind of look at a piece and really like go, what the hell is going on? You know what I mean? And I just think it's really, I just think it's really cool to find. I think that tattoos work in threes really well, if that makes sense. The rule of thirds. So a rule that I always say, and I'm not saying this is the way it is or anything. It's just my opinion, but I like so a really easy way to create a kind of a surreal design is simple. It's an animal, insect, a flower or fruit, and an object. Or I would say flower, fruit, and or fungus and an object. Those three, and also I think tattoos kind of work well in odd numbers, not even numbers. So threes, fives, one, so when I'm designing things, I do count a lot too, like how many petals are in this, how many stars or how many things. I try and keep things kind of dialed in that way, and I
Yeah.
think the rule of thirds when it comes to designing things makes sense. So you're trying to like, yeah, it's it's like an animal, insect, a flower, fruit, and a fungus, and so
Yeah.
not every time it works out that way, but when I'm designing stuff, I'm trying to kind of incorporate in an object, obviously. So here we have like an object with animals, and
Yeah.
there's so many different variations. So yeah, when it comes to like, so the frog, for example, that was somebody asked for a wizard frog, and I was just trying to think of. I also, like I come from a background of comics. Well, as far as like trying to emulate comics, so in a lot of the comic books, you see tons of figures floating all the time. They're always jumping, they're foreshortened, they're doing those things. And when we're putting them on the body, I also tend to kind of think that way. You know what I mean? So I'm thinking like this is kind of like moving on the skin, or it's not grounded by anything, because as soon as you ground something, you're kind of cutting off parts of the body. So the idea would be to kind of keep things kind of foreshortened. So I'll tuck their legs in a little bit, and I'll kind of make them jumping or leaping, and that seems to kind of lend to shape. You know what I mean? Like kind of trying to
Yeah.
fit things to the body.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to think of it. When you ground something, you kind of like you cut it off. If it's in action, if it's in motion, you have the freedom to really arrange shapes to fit the body.
Yeah, and then
So
you're
much
you're
better.
foreshortening things. You can kind of extend things, like if I extend my hand, you know what I mean? It's like, you're trying to kind of play with that. Now, it doesn't always work that way, and you can only get so dynamic with a tattoo because you have to be really realistic about like the longevity of the tattoo and how it's going to be received over years and what it's going to look like. So, when I'm drawing things that are more, when I'm illustrating things that are more in that world, I will kind of go a little off the rails sometimes, but then um I have to really kind of hone it back in and go like, it's a tattoo. It's not a piece of comic book art, and
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
What was Monica's second part of the question? Something about color?
Yeah, so like that was actually good what I was gonna bring up. How do you do some of your color choices for a lot of your tattoos? Because like in the interview that you had with Jake originally, he asked you about how a lot of your stuff looks really vibrant, or I
mm.
like his terminology, really juicy. And so like there's a lot of and I'm sure you do like a cool background, hot foreground kind of thing, a lot of contrast that way. But like, what's your ideation for choosing colors whenever you're doing one of these anthropomorphized animal things, or just like any of your tattoos really? But like,
Yeah, most of it, to be honest, a lot of it is just complementary colors.
Right.
And sometimes you can learn things to like a fault. I honestly, I don't feel like my color choices are the greatest. I was just talking with a local artist here in Sac, and I was asking him, because he will just, just use wild colors, and they're so cool, and can't seem to, I just kind of go like, well, I'm just gonna, I stay grounded when it comes to like more complimentary, and I'd like to break that mold a little bit, and get a little
Good on
maybe.
that chicken. Go
What's
down.
that?
Good on that chicken.
The chicken.
So,
So-
like, when you're using the colors, though, are you mixing them in the tube? Are you planning out the blends beforehand? Or are
I
you just
don't
like, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Or are you just deciding we're doing green and we're doing orange or yellow, and then the blends will come out how they'll come out?
Sometimes I'll just ask the client if they have a favorite color, or I'll ask the client if they have a color that they don't like. Sometimes it's easier to ask them what they don't like. But it's weird. Some people will go, I really like blues or whatever, and so I'll try and stick to that kind of thing. I noticed a lot of my color schemes are kind of, so it kind of comes back to like painting a lot. I find that like trying to kind of desaturate the background and then really saturate the foreground tends to, like, the subject matter, or where we're trying to lead your eye is really what I'm trying to get at, so I'll kind of desaturate the background quite a bit, and I'll kind of push the saturation in the foreground. And you can, a lot of times I'll try and use a lot of colors right out of the tube. I don't like to mix too often if I can help it. If I have a color that just works and I can use it and it's consistent, I like that, instead of having to make sure that my ratios are a little correct, or I'm dipping, touching things a little bit and trying to get it. I try and kind of stay away from that. So if I choose to do something that's like a big color, of a field of color, I'll try and use colors just straight out of the tube. Um, there's not really any secret to that. But smaller stuff, like if I'm trying to, if I'm rendering something smaller and I can get away with mixing colors and dipping them into things, then I will. But for the most part, if I'm going to do a big field of color, I'd like to use things straight out of the tube.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
had another question that was actually related to the murals that you were showing. About how much do you charge for a wall like that?
That's a tough one.
Not
So,
enough.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's the short answer. Jake kind of hit it on the nose there.
Yeah.
He knows. He's probably done
Yeah.
a couple murals in his time. He knows. But honestly, it depends on who it's for and what you're doing it for. So it's difficult. So if I was going to charge for a painting, if I did an oil painting and I charge for it, there was all sorts of formulas that people will use. To be honest, what I charge for a painting is what I would consider like what is the least amount of money I'm willing to take to let go of this painting and not be upset about it. When I hand it over to somebody, if I have regret, or I get uncomfortable, afterwards, or I start to kind of second guess myself, then I know I didn't charge enough, So you have to base things on like what's, because otherwise it's like, well, why would I want to give it away? I'll just let it hang in my shop. There's no real, um, and eventually somebody will pay what you want for it. That's the thing. That's the nice part about having kind of a brick and mortar, is that, if I have a piece of art, I can try and sell it, and if it doesn't sell, I'll just hang it in my shop, and eventually somebody will buy it. Eventually, sometimes not. I've had paintings that have been sitting there for years that just nobody buys. But when it comes to like murals, a lot of times I will ask what the budget is right off the bat. Like, try and flip it and reverse it on people, and just go, well, what's your budget? And then once they tell me their budget, then I go, well, I'll design the mural based on your budget. And so that way I'm not getting too in the weeds or spending way more time than I need to, and feeling like I'm getting, the short end of the stick, I guess. I hope that kind of answers the question. But the best thing to do is just ask them, like even a tattoo. Sometimes you'll have people that are like kind of asking prices, and they're really curious about the pricing and stuff. And you're like, well, what's your budget? And I'll
It's
just tell you
really
right away.
important to know
Yeah.
like how you're calculating what you're doing. And I understand asking for budget, but what if someone just randomly came up to you, say, hey, like I saw that mural you did for this guy, how much for this wall, and this is what size it is. You
Well,
have
Same
no
thing. Just ask
estimate
for the
based
budget.
on. I'm
I would
sorry?
still ask.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, see, he's saying still ask for the budget, even from the next person, because they don't know what the last person paid. You never know. A
Well,
lot of times, asking for the budget, you end up, the budget's far beyond what you might have guessed it would have been. You might have said, "I'll do it for $5,000," and their budget's 25,000. You never know.
Yeah. I think an easy, a lot of times I will, for example, sometimes I'll do it based on, I'll like the last mural I did, I just basically like tripled my cost of supplies. You know what I mean? And then I saw that number, and then I went, that seems based on time. And the other thing too is like who you're doing it for is really important. So the murals that I'm showing you are done for a good friend of mine, and they take care of me and my wife and my shop and the people that work for me. And a lot of times it's like, sometimes I wouldn't mind doing it for a lot less money if I know that, when we go in there, I bring the guys from my shop come in and bring their wives or kids or whatever, that they can get a discount, for food or something like that. So, when I've done murals in the past, a lot of times it's like, yeah, they'll give me money, but honestly, we're going to eat there anyway. And so they'll usually, give us crazy breaks on food, and this is not like, like this is Crew in Sacramento is a very high, it's a very good sushi restaurant. It's a very, I don't know what you call it, renowned or well-known place. And so, you're getting really, so there's a give and take, there's like trade when it comes to that as well. So if it's a stranger, my advice would be, just be straight up, ask them what they think their budget is to begin with. And if they, and then um, see if you can work within their budget.
One thing I was going to say earlier on this is, you use like line to describe like the terrain of form a lot, and you build a lot of texture, but then you do a really great job of balancing these kind of open areas in almost everything. It's like almost never do I see something get like busy, like, you know what I mean? Like you have a lot of um a lot of texture, and then a lot of open space. Is that something you're consciously thinking about a lot with your layouts? Because you do tend to do a lot of line work, like to describe form, right?
Yeah, well, when I was getting tattooed by Matt Lambden, he was doing my neck at the time, and he, I asked him about it too, and he wasn't too concerned about color. He was more concerned about his line work. And it's like, well, if he was very much more focused on line work, and that if the color would fade over time or do something like that, then he was okay with that. He was like, well, at least the line work is still going to be there, And so I come from an illustration background, so that's easy for me. I like to illustrate a lot of stuff, and so I do a lot of line work, and I try and let kind of like you said, I do a lot of line work, and then I try and keep my color schemes very simple. So like it looks busy, but when you really look at it, it's like the piece you're showing right now. It's like there's only like two colors in that skull and one color of the ferns, one color for the top of the, and so all I'm thinking about is the color. So you're basically a mid-tone in your highlight area, you know what I mean? And so I don't want to get into the weeds about like trying to transition every step of the way. I don't need three browns to make a tree trunk. I just need two maybe, or one, and then leaving areas of skin open. I think leaving areas of skin open, now that comes back to like kind of the idea of like a traditional tattoo, right? The traditional tattoo is if I understand it correctly, is the rule of thirds, right? That the idea is it's a third skin, a third black, and a third color. So that ratio, obviously you can see in my work, I tend to use a lot of color, and there's not in my opinion, I don't use enough skin tone. You know what I mean? I would like to kind of reduce the amount of transitional colors and things like that. And I'm trying to get more focused on like line work and simplistic color and skin. That's really what I'm trying to do. And I feel like I've been tattooing long enough to know that formula seems to work pretty well, at least for the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, I agree. I really love. I was looking at this one earlier as we were talking, and when we were first talking about color, and that you've got we always push, and Corey, if I remember right, when we did our first podcast, we talked a lot about just like fundamentals of shapes and values, and and value ranges being more important than color, and all of that. And so I was looking at this and thinking that this was such a great example of a tattoo that's very dynamic, and it stands out. All the shapes work really well. You have a nice kind of full value range, but really the bold color, if this person's wearing like a short sleeve shirt that goes down to here, there's really almost no bold punchy color. The entire thing it's kind of in these grays and browns, these sort of fall tones, but the shape, I can tell from the photo, I can tell that shape reads really well from a distance. And so I think a lot of times when you're thinking about, using colors, what your favorite colors are, what your color combinations are, and always go back to, just making sure that you're separating your dark and light shapes.
You hit the nail on the head right there. I think separating darks and lights are the key when it comes to a tattoo. I think that the easiest thing is like, so you can see right under the face of the rabbit that you're showing now. So you can see look at how it's darker next to that yellow, but then as soon as it kind of comes away from the lightest lights, I'm trying to like, if I know something's going to be really light, I will try and put something really dark next to it. And that could be like just a bold line, you know what I mean? Real heavy dark line. But I'm trying to kind of think of that in usually when I start a tattoo. So I don't know how you guys tattoo, but I typically break my tattoos up. I don't really I don't usually line and color something at the same time. I will line it, and I will do what I guess what you guys would call like spot blacks. You know what I mean? I'll identify the darkest darks or whatever black I'm going to use. And so I'll line it, hit all my blacks, and then I'll go, cool, I'll see you next month. And then they come back, and then I just wash over everything with color, and I don't have to worry about working over a lot of line work, if that makes sense. Because sometimes I do put a bunch of line work and stuff, and there's no way, once you've lined something and their skin's all, swollen from being line work, and what you're going to go in there and saturate all this stuff. It's like you're going to have to work around all this stuff. To me, it makes more sense just to let it settle, heal, and then I don't have to worry about shading over a lot of my line work. I just shade right over the top of it. And most people in my opinion tend to like it that way, because usually I can keep things I try and keep sessions within a 3-hour window. I feel like that seems to be, I try and make it work with their budget, and anyone can come in and get tattooed for 3 hours. Sometimes it's not as much, but and sometimes people want to sit a little longer, and I will go longer sessions if somebody's coming from out of town. I have a lot of clients that come, Sacramento's like an hour and a half from San Francisco. So I do have clients that will come from the Bay Area quite a bit because the Bay Area is like astronomical. Their tattoo pricing is pretty heavy in that area. So we get a lot of customers that kind of come from the Bay Area to get tattooed in Sacramento and surrounding areas. So if you're gonna travel, you know, a few hours to come see me, I'll try and make it worth your while and try and do as much as I can in those sessions. But if you're local, what's you know, it doesn't, I
What's
think,
the rush, huh?
yeah, what's the rush? And I think you get a better product if you just let me do all the line work and hit the spot blacks real quick. We'll let it heal. I'll see you in 4 weeks. I usually do every 4 weeks. And you come back in, and then I'll just wash color right over the top of everything. I don't have to worry about, all I have to do is make sure that I'm staying within the confines of the silhouette of the whatever I'm, you know, shading at the point. But as far as
Yeah.
like worried about going over line work multiple times because I'm trying to put other colors in, I think it just it just works better. I think people get a better, and it keeps a tattoo within a budget that is friendly for people. You can only get somebody to come in and sit in your check. You know, if you expect somebody to come in and sit for 8 hours, 10 hours at a time, like some of these guys do, it's like, cool, you might get them once, you know, but then it's like you just killed their entire budget, and you know, good luck. They're probably going to reschedule on you the next time because they're not going to be able to afford it. So keep the artwork within a reasonable budget. So I think, you know, I'm $200 an hour is what I typically charge, and I try and keep it within, you know, a 3 hour session every time, and so that way the customer knows that it's not going to be more than this. It might be less, but it's never really going to be more than that. And and yeah, you know, in that way it's like it's more like a car payment every month. It's not this like $1,000 thing that you're dropping all this money and then you're like, cool, you're going to do it all over again next month, and people can't keep up with that. I mean, sure, people can, but odds are, you know, so you want to work with customers. I would rather have people come back consistently than trying to squeeze a lot of money out of them every time they come in. It just, I don't think that's a good method of doing business. But that's my opinion. Now, there's tons of other artists. I have friends who, you know, black and gray artists that will, sit and tattoo people for like 10 hours at a time, you know, or something, you know, ridiculous, or, you know, some of that stuff I can't tattoo that long. My eyes go crossed after like 3 or 4 hours. I just, like, I can't keep my focus, and as soon as I'm getting burned out, well, then I'm not making any progress. The client's in a lot of pain. I'm uncomfortable, you know, and my brain's not there. And so it's like, cool, let's just call it. I'll see you next month, you know, and we'll you know, and it makes it a lot more of a friendly experience. And I think also, like, it doesn't ruin your day. You know what I mean? You ever tattoo? I mean, you guys know, you tattooed somebody for 6, 7 hours, you know what I mean? And then you're like, you hear about, you know, they'll come back in, they're like, oh yeah, I passed out in my car after I left, or
Yeah.
I couldn't go out with my family afterwards. I was like, you know, just miserable. You know what I mean? It's like, most people can sit through a 3 hour tattoo. You know what I mean? 3 hours seems to be a good window, to where you're not scaring the shit out of somebody, basically, that they're like, oh my God. Now, when I've gotten tattooed, I don't really care. I tend to go with whatever the artist chooses, you know. So I got my torso done a couple years ago, and I just let him decide. When he was done, he was done, and I just sat through whatever I could. If I couldn't sit through more, I would have told him, but you know, for the most part, I just kind of let those guys do what they do, you know. So
Yeah. Anthony, you had a question, or both Anthony and Dan? I don't know who raised their hand first, but you guys can figure it out.
oh, you guys got little hands in the little
Yeah.
windows too? That's
Yeah,
cool.
pretty cool. Go ahead, Anthony. We haven't heard your voice in a long time.
I do have little hands. It's hard for me to stretch.
Yeah.
Corey, thanks for this info. I absolutely love your work, man.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, your line work, it just looks like calligraphy to me. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I'm a big. If you guys get a chance, I would highly recommend getting an old 1.25 grip, you know, with the little set screws on the top, and order a handful of those disposable those stems from Black Claw, dude. It'll change your world. Like, it will. Like, going back to needle. I mean, I'm lucky enough that I was in the post, you know, I was still scrubbing tubes and autoclaving things back in the day, you know, and these kids now don't understand that. But if you had the experience of lining with a stainless steel tube, you know, it's superior to anything. So I feel like, that would be my suggestion, going back to kind of the basics. And I feel like my line work got much more solid, and I was a lot happier with my line work going back to needle on bar and working that way. I
Yeah.
understand the idea of like cartridges and everything else, and hey, there's my wife lines with cartridges, and she's like, when she does some of the best line work I've ever seen. You know what I mean? So and she uses a rotary pen machine, and it looks great. So it's just everybody's kind of, everybody has their own thing that works for them. But for me, I feel like just the standard needle on bar in an aluminum tube is just it'll change your life.
If you have the opportunity to try them, maybe you can reach out to Dan. He might, send you one or send you the setup. Those his quick
Swift tips
his
or whatever.
Swift tips.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I would like to try them. He came through here and said he was going to leave me some, and got up early the next morning and left, and I didn't get any, so I need to order some.
I've been using them, and it's a really streamlined system.
Yeah.
You might prefer one thing one way or the other, depending on what you like better with the Black Claw tubes. But yeah, it's funny. I've been using the same exact machines you are. I started using Cubans, I don't know, a year or two ago, and it changed my lining approach. Of course, I'm still working on it. You're a year older than I am, but I've been tattooing a very short amount of time. So yeah, I feel you on the Cubans with the needles.
Isn't it? Go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you off there, bud.
That's it, with the needles on bar, and I use those Swift tips, and it's a brass grip, so it's a nice balance.
I love the heavy machine. I can't go back now. I can't go backwards. I definitely was, like I said, when I first started tattooing, it was still coil machines, you know what I mean? And coils were a nightmare, when I first started. It was like, your clip cord wouldn't connect properly, and here you have a client sitting in a chair, and you're like rubber banding your clip cord to like other parts of the machine to get it to work, and you feel like an asshole, because you're just, you look like you don't know what you're doing, and it's like, it's the same thing. So in my opinion, like the coil machine is like kind of like going back to the whole purpose, like automatic versus manual transmission cars. You know what I mean? It's like once you understand it, it's like it's fun to drive it's fun to drive a manual car, because you just feel you understand what's happening within the car. And so the Cubans really brought that back, where I'm getting this like this kind of residual feedback from the machine. I don't need I can hear and feel that my line work is good. I don't have to I don't have to wipe it and see if it's good. I could feel that it's good. I can hear the machine running, and I know when I pull something, it's there, and that might sound like cocky or something, but I'm telling you, like, I've used pen machines for a long time, and I was always like second guessing myself. Look at, here, we were talking about at the shop. It's funny now how kids who are just getting into tattooing are just go right to pen machines, and then there's no residual feedback with a pen machine. They're just running it at some god awful, 11 volts or something, something ridiculous, and then you'll see Reddit articles on about Cubans, like, oh, I bought a Cuban and it won't work, it just spits everywhere, and they're like, what are you running it at? And they're like, 11 volts, and it's like, what are you doing? Like, what do if you ever had used a coil in the past, you would realize everything is low and slow. So low and slow. And the easiest way to think about it is you ever seen like a magician who pulls the tablecloth off of the china really quick and the china doesn't move? It's like, if you think of the china as as your ink, and the sheet that you're pulling is the machine. If I pulled that sheet real slow, all the china comes with it. If I pull it really fast, nothing moves. And so what these kids will do is they'll crank the machine up, because everybody thinks faster is better. And what you're doing is the machine is just screaming, but the viscosity of your pigment is just sitting there on top. So slow the machine down. If you have a problem, slow it down. And then your pigment and your needle groupings will work in conjunction with each other, and everything will flow really nicely. And you'll find that you'll get way better results when it comes to tattooing. And so now I'll try and run my machines as low as I possibly can. So like with my Cuban machines, I'll run them between 4.6 volts and maybe 5.2. You know, like 5.2 is what I use for like a shader or maybe a large liner. But other than that, I'm like 4.6, 4.7. I keep things really low. And I feel like that's a nice, it's like everything's kind of working in tandem with each other. The viscosity of the ink is working with the needles, as opposed to just the machine screaming at 1,000 miles an hour, and you're just beating people up, you know, at that point. So
That making that point that makes me reminds me I have a sidewinder and I use it for I don't use it all the time but I use it for this kind of stippled let me see if I
yeah.
have anything of it, stippled kind of black and gray stuff. Sure something will come across here. So maybe this is a good example. So this kind of like stippled gray. Okay, see, so all that stuff's done with like a 3
Yeah.
light
Okay.
shader. I run the Cuban at 2.8 volts for that. You have to kickstart it. You have to like thump it
Yep.
to get it going, but it just makes the cleanest little dots. Uh, but yeah,
2 point.
that two, yeah. You can't even. It won't even the foot switch won't even turn it on. You have to kick the armature bar.
You actually have to hit it on your
You
station
have
like
to
back
hit
in
it
the
with,
day. Yeah.
yeah. You have to like slap it with your thumb. But
Yeah,
it
I remember we used to use coil machines, and then the ink would dry in the tube, and you had to like kind of hit the armature
yeah,
bar on your station
right.
to get it going again. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I thought I had more examples of that, but yeah, but it works so well. And you think like you were talking about low and slow, and that popped in my head. I was like, yeah, it's crazy like that how low you can actually go with with some of those machines, especially when it's needle on bar, and you can't get away with that with cartridges. I don't think you can
Okay,
get
the horses go up a little bit to the horses. That might be one. You have like a black.
Hey
this.
Jake, I was going to ask you too, but like, what do you think about the red stencil as opposed to the purple? Is there a reason why
Man,
you
it's
use the red? I haven't used
yeah.
it yet, but I was curious what you thought of it.
I've been using it exclusively for probably 5 years or more. I wash line everything on the front end, and I can't see my light washes through purple at all, but I can see everything
Okay.
through red. Red also shows up way better on dark skin. On dark
Oh,
skin,
okay.
your purple stencil will turn kind of gold on you and get
Yep.
shiny, and you can't tell. You have to
Yeah,
wet
and
it
you got
over
to
and
put
over.
all your lights in this weird Rube Goldberg device to see what you're
Yeah,
doing. Yeah.
right, exactly. You don't have that problem with the red. The only issue with the red is just the slight learning curve of learning how to place the stencil. So it's I use so S8 makes the red stencil, and I use their transfer gel. I've tried to use like Electro, a few other ones, and I think theirs works the best. But I kind of like you put it on. I put on a thin coat, wipe it back off, and then put on a second thin coat and let it just tack for a second. Then place the stencil, and I'll let the stencil sit on the skin for a good 30 seconds to a minute and let it dry on the skin, and then peel it off, and then the stencil's good. If you do it like a lot of people do with purple, where you just like stick it and pull it, it'll wipe off. And almost any complaint you hear about the red stencil is people say it doesn't stay on, and it's just because they didn't take the time to learn to put it on. Like, but
Crazy.
yeah. What's
Oh, that's cool. That's good to know. Yeah, I was curious. I've seen it. I've seen the product before. I just never used it. Yeah, there's a couple guys at a shop not too far from us. They use it and they swear by it, and they think it's a really cool,
yeah.
system or whatever. But
I really like it. I think their plan, they kind of lost their chief dude, the guy that was behind all the science behind all this, but he was planning to release an entire kind of like uh variety of stencils that worked great, like great for different skin tones. Like he had basically used information from the cosmetics industry that they had that had become kind of public knowledge by now. It's like they invested a lot of money in the 50s and 60s trying to find tones of makeup that worked perfectly for different skin tones. And so they were able to they kind of simplified skin tones down to like 6 or 8 general skin tones. And he was using that information to create multiple stencil varieties
rad.
that would work for that, but it never got there.
That's
So,
smart. That's very smart. Yeah.
yeah.
I love the innovation in the tattoo industry is really cool. Some of it for good, some of it for bad. You know, like I said, like there's definitely different, this whole idea of like I was talking about in the beginning, this idea of like I've been through like kind of 3 generations of tattooing kind of, where you had your post and your pre and post autoclave, right? So like when I started, it was like everything was autoclaved. Um, and then disposable tubes came out. And that was a game changer because then it was like, well, now you can tattoo, but you don't have to have an autoclave. So there's like so much investment right there, right out the window, right? And then you get to then the next generation comes and it's pre and post like pen machine / cartridge. And that's really cool and innovative. But now you're opening the door to even more tattoo artists to get into the game with less investment, because back in the day it was like, well, I had to set up 2 liners, 2 shaders, maybe 3 shaders sometimes, depending on it. So I had to invest in 5 machines, and all these things. And now you can get one machine and just plug and play everything. You know what I mean? Um, and then you
Yeah.
have the iPad, that came out after that, where now, it seems like the community is starting to get way more addicted to their iPad, and they're losing the fundamentals of drawing as we watch me draw on my iPad here on the screen. But you know what I mean? Like I think that, innovation's great to a certain point, but I feel like talking to there's a guy who works for me named David Barnitz, who's a fantastic artist, and the guy is just unreal. He's like one of my favorite artists, and he's just so good at everything. He's been tattooing for forever, and he's just so good at everything. But he still draws everything, and he has an iPad and he'll draw on it, but he doesn't ever save anything on his iPad. He doesn't,
Mm.
and I'm like, wait, you don't save any images on your iPad? He's like, no, I just use it like a sketchbook, So he'll get an idea, he'll do a little doodle on his iPad, and then he'll draw in full scale of the tracing of somebody's arm.
Mhm.
And I'm like, that makes
Huh.
so much more sense than getting caught up in the weeds of like pinching and squeezing. And, we get into
Yeah.
that routine of everything is like squeezing and doing more detail and doing more detail. And it's like, no, like, just, you're going to spend less time if you just use the iPad to sketch and then go right to tracing paper and draw it out, and then that way you fundamentally are getting, you're getting more out of it. Anybody could take something and trace it off the internet or whatever. What really separates us as tattoo artists is the ability to draw and innovate and be able to confront problems head on, right? And
Yeah.
problem solving is a big part of it, and so the iPad was a great tool to expedite the process, and I use it all the time, trust me. I'm definitely, but I feel like the older I'm getting now, the more I'm starting to want to go back to the fundamentals, because I'm not drawing as much anymore, and I'm not really, I feel like it's not helping me grow as much as I thought it would. It's helping me expedite the drawing process, but it's not really helping me grow. You know what I mean? If that makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So innovation could be good and bad, is what I'm trying to say. It's like it's great, but you have to experiment with all these things, and then you start to come kind of full circle and start to go back. Like I was so desperate to get away from coils because I was just riding the struggle bus every time I would use one, that when the cartridges and the pen machines came out, I was like, hallelujah. You know what I mean? Like, this is awesome. I can use one machine and I could just plug and play all these cartridges. And then I don't know about you, but like I'm starting to see work now where I've watched guys who started with coils and then seeing that they've adopted the pen cartridge system, and the quality of the work is it's still good, but it's not the same. There's just something about the original coil Cuban kind of, even though, obviously Cubans are coils, they're like a hybrid basically. But you're seeing some of that now where you're starting to see like, wow, like, sometimes the first tools were kind of the best tools, you know what I mean? And we're just trying to kind of simplify and streamline everything too quickly, and it's like, let's get back to our roots, and so that's something I'm trying to teach myself right now. I'm not saying this in a like I'm doing this and you guys don't know, you know what I mean? It's like, I know, I'm so addicted to my iPad. I'm trying to kind of break the mold and go back to, kind of traditional illustration and tracing paper and Sharpies and,
Yeah.
I just feel like I feel like you need to start there and then go to the iPad, you know what I mean? And then come back and then go, you know what I mean? So
I'm,
I
I'm
think.
yeah,
really,
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Monica. Go
um,
ahead.
I really like hearing that you started one spot and you went to another, like the different tools. It took me a very long time to be willing to try rotaries, and then it took me just as long to try the pen tool.
yeah,
And even when I did that, I still couldn't get anything else to work like a traditional shader. And for the last few months, I've been trying to just use the pen tool for everything. And just a couple days ago, I used a traditional shader. It was like, oh my God, this is why I hated everything else.
It is weird, right? I find it like the most people, so like people at the shop where I work, or the shop I own, like most of those guys, they will use bishops or wands or whatever for shading only, and then use your coils or your cubans for lining. Because it's nice. I don't have to set up like 5 or 6 machines for my shaders. I could just, if I need a 7 mag, I plug that in. If I need a 9 or 11, I could just unglove, pull it out of the drawer and plug it in. And it's like easy, because originally, when you would start with coil machines, it was like you kind of gauged, you would look at the design on the body and then you go, I think like a 9 liner would work, or excuse me, like a 9 mag. And then you get a 9 mag and then you realize, no, it doesn't, what I mean? But you were too stubborn to stop what you were doing and set up a whole nother setup or a machine that you would just push through with the coils sometimes. So I think that like I was saying, I think the Cubans are like a good mix of kind of a not necessarily like a pen machine, but still getting that tactile kind of function of a coil machine with the plug and play of a cartridge. But going to what you were saying, I haven't used a coil shader in so long, and I'm really kind of excited to try it again, just because I've been having so much fun using these Cubans. Just going to go back to like a needle on bar shader, I think would be fun. But like I said, you have to be very diligent about picking the right mag for what you're doing, because we all know that like you're going to get in the weeds and it's like, oh, I think a 13 mag will do it, and then halfway through you're like, no, actually I needed like a 7 or a 9.
Well,
And then you got to either
Then you gotta change
break
it
down
out.
the machine and reset it back up again. So
that
that's
takes
that's
almost
where
2
my
minutes.
you know
Like with the cartridge machine, you can have like 10 different cartridges laid out if you want.
if
And
you
I
want.
don't
Yeah.
know, like with traditional machines, I started with one and had one for like 4 years. So
Yeah.
every time I was like, okay, I need to modify this to make it a shader right now. I need to modify this because I need the liner again. It just
Yeah.
took
Oh,
5
you were
minutes.
tweaking a coil machine back and forth.
Exactly.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
It's
Anthony, you had a
it,
question? Sorry, I was just.
Yeah, it's funny. When I raised my hand, you almost started answering my question before I could ask it. Talking about using the iPad, because I've been enjoying watching your playbacks, like your what do you call
Yeah.
them? Your time
Yeah,
lapse
time
draw
lapse. Yeah.
yeah.
from the iPad, and I can see, your illustrative background. It's like you're starting with a non-photo blue and then going over that with red, and then, black lining that.
Isn't Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna. The question was gonna be something about like how has the iPad changed your work, and then you did get into that. So I'm just wondering, like, what you might be able to share, if anything. Like, do you have examples that you can show of like some of your early drawings, or do you have any like
Pre iPad kind of stuff.
pre iPad like stuff on paper, or you know I can see your process in your iPad sketch, but do you have anything? Do you thumbnail at all? Do you do like a rough draft at all, or is it pretty?
I do thumbnail. It's funny. I thumbnail on post-it notes. So I get like a 4x6 post-it note, and I just do little thumbnails and like doodles on them to try to get things out of my head, and then
Yeah.
I'll usually go from there. Either I'll take a photo of it with my phone, or I'll go. I'll just kind of go like I kind of get the idea what I'm doing, and I'll go right to my iPad. As far as like examples, I don't. It's funny. I pulled out all these like reference books and all these things, but I did not pull out anything of like
Your own.
like actual traditional art. I do, like I have like a painting I could show you that I just finished or something. But as far as like the I don't know. But I'd like to share that. I now that I have the setup, because here's the thing, when you're an artist, you have to kind of fake it till you make it. So like all the like the microphone I'm using right now and the lighting and everything, I bought them all just for this show. You know what I mean? Just
Oh,
because
nice.
I wanted to make everybody think that I actually am a professional and I know what I'm doing here. But I got but I got a GoPro for over my desk, and so I would like to start sharing that. I definitely have gotten such a good feedback when it comes to like the time lapse stuff that I would love to start doing it with more, trying to inspire kids to try and go back to kind of the kind of like quote unquote primitive methods that we were using before the iPad, which is real simple, which was just this layer of tracing paper. You know what I mean? You'd start with like a light Sharpie and then go to like a little bit darker, and then you'd pull another piece of tracing paper over the top and do another rendition, and then pull another piece of tracing paper over the top and do a micron stencil thing. I'd really like to get back to that. It's something that I just want to challenge myself to make sure that I could still, I guess, do it a little bit.
Well,
So
for whatever it's worth, Corey, that is the way that I do it. And so yeah, I just want to like say,
Nice.
like high five you and say, yeah, go for it. Get like rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah,
and
I think it's this. I mean, I just think you're drawing to scale so much better. You know what I mean? And you're not getting into the weeds. Everybody wants to pinch. You want to get just zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, and it's like you're not looking at it in the sense of like a broad spectrum. It's like if I only have like an 8x10 piece of paper that I'm drawing a sleeve on. It's like I think I know how much I can get away with and what I can't. And sometimes I've designed stuff in the iPad that's just ridiculous. And I put it on somebody's skin and I'm like, this is gonna take me fucking forever. You know what I mean? Like, why did I get so in the weeds? If I had just taken a tracing of somebody's arm, did some preliminary sketches in the iPad, and then used my iPad as like a sketchbook rather than doing the final stencil in, and then just moved right to traditional media and drawn it that way, I feel like you would leave out so much more of you wouldn't get so in the weeds, and I think you would expedite the drawing process even further, and you would help yourself learn to draw more efficiently. You know what I mean? Because it's so easy to use all the tools in the iPad, right? Everybody wants to like lasso things, and I do it all the time. I'll draw something, I'll put it in another layer, I'll use like the warp tool, and I'll stretch and pull and overlay things. I was going to ask you, Anthony, is it weird? Because I've seen other people go like, oh, like I had somebody go, huh, you use the blue for the underdrawing and then the red, and so many people use red and then blue. And I could never understand. It always seemed to me that like when you're sketching with like, I always just start with the photo blue because that's how I saw comic book illustrators do it. And then use red to kind of refine things. And then I would then scan those images, and then I would, do usually a digital outline on top of that stuff. But I'd like to go back to using like microns and stuff, just challenging myself, I think is really what it comes down to.
Yeah. Well, to your point, you can lasso something and change the size or the angle of a shape of a wing of a head or whatever, and like test it a dozen different ways. But because you can do that, you don't necessarily have to worry too much about drawing it correctly the first time. You just kind of get it on there, and then you have the luxury to go like, okay, that's not it, but I'll scoot it around and make it work. Whereas if you're on paper, you're more likely to put the thought into what it should look like.
Exactly. And if it's not right, well, then what do? You just got to draw it all over again.
Draw it
you know
again,
what I mean?
right?
And so you're reinforcing your own technique. You're reinforcing your own. You're really giving you're actually helping yourself more than you're helping anybody else. It's like the more we learn to draw, the more we can expedite the process. Because like for example, like when I first started tattooing, I thought everything was traced. I just didn't know any better. You know what I mean? I just thought everything was traced. I just thought that's how you tattoo. And the more and more I got into it, the more I started realizing that like, no, you try and you can use this to draw and actually like, insert your style into something. You know what I mean? And also you're doing it without the idea of like kind of guaranteeing that like eventually somebody's going to trace the same exact thing you're doing. You know what I mean? And you can guarantee that at least a dozen people around the United States are going to have the exact same tattoo. You know what I mean? And so if I'm drawing something from start to finish, that means it's a one-off. Now, I could post it online and somebody could trace it if they think my artwork's worth tracing or something. But for the most part, I think it's you're really just reinforcing your own fundamentals as an artist, and it's easy to. I've been working on the iPad so much, I'm like, do I even know how to draw anymore? You know what I mean? Like when it comes
Right.
to like traditional media, and I need to know, like now I'm at that point where I'm like, I gotta know if I can still do this, you know what I mean?
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Now,
did you have I'm just sitting here sharing just while we're talking. Did you have anything else you wanted that you wanted to share of your own, whether it's paintings or the book? You mentioned the books and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Okay.
so yeah, I mean, comic books was always like obviously a big part. So when I was younger, like probably in the early 80s, I was born in 1980. So, probably by the time I was like 5 or 6 is when I got introduced to the comic books that I showed you originally. And then from there, it went to like, other, comic books and stuff. And then when I was in high school, I was a junior in high school. I went to school with Ryan Clark, and Ryan Clark is the singer for a band called Demon Hunter. Him and his brother started a design studio called Asterisk Studio that later became Invisible Creature. These guys are the guys who did like the album, the cover art for like the Foo Fighters, you know what I mean? And like all of these bands that you would, like Under Oath and all these other bands that you would never see. And so, I'm gonna share with you this kid was like he was already playing, so I thought I was cool when I was in high school because I was like in like a garage band. This kid was like in a band called Focal Point. He was like 17 years old, 18 years old, already signed to a label, already doing this stuff. They were already like going out and doing all these things. And my mind just like exploded, you know what I mean? And so I followed his work quite a bit, And so before I got into, here's the thing is like when it comes to like learning good technique, the one thing is like it's easy to go, well, just go surround yourself by great artists and and you'll just get better that way. Nobody knows how to do that, I certainly didn't. All I could do was like emulate people that I saw, right? And so that's what I mean like by the idea of like self-learned technique, which is like all I'm doing is looking at things that I'm seeing that inspire me, and I'm trying to kind of figure out how they did it in my own weird way. I'll show you an example here. So, because before I started tattooing, and how I got into tattooing was graphic design. I worked for Tower Records as a graphic artist. I did tons of branding for local bands. I did a lot of flyer work for local venues. Just tons of stuff, anything I can get my hands on, because all art is always related to one another. It's like, well, I want to draw comics, but it's like, well, good luck, you know what I mean? And then you start to kind of scale things back and go, well, I just want to make a living doing art. So you start scaling it down even further, and then eventually you're like, well, hopefully I'll just be able to get a job, drawing for a living, maybe. You know what I mean? And so you start to kind of reduce things. So you just basically say yes to everything. So I'll show you real quick. And I know you guys are, what do we have, like 20 minutes left here probably, or
We
whatever?
actually
Yeah,
have
we probably
as
have
much
some.
time as
Okay.
you're willing to give if you want.
Yeah. Dan, did
If
you?
you guys
Sorry.
will have me, I'll go through the whole thing real quick. So,
Yeah.
so this is Invisible Creature, right? And so this is their book from 2000 to 2020, right? And so,
Hey Corey, one second. It's a little hard to hear you because your mic might be
oh, sorry.
like a
Yeah.
just
There
move
Let me
your
see if I
mic
can do that.
over.
Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay, cool. Sorry, guys. So let's see. So this is Ryan Clark, who I went to school with, and his brother Don, and they were designing. So they designed like the Foo Fighters album, right? Let's see if I can. This is kind of a pain in the ass to kind of hold up what I'm doing, but I can kind of show you. You know, and then they were doing this really cool stuff where like, they were integrating like this surreal imagery where they were like taking photos of people and like, integrating, and they were doing these set pieces and like putting these things together, and so you can kind of get an idea of like, look at how, like this blew my mind as a kid, you know what I mean? That you could like, when I was younger, looking at all this integrated, kind of stuff, um, and they were just really cool stuff that they were doing. And so that's what I was trying to strive to do, was like emulate some of this stuff originally. And that really helped kind of.
What year was this? When do you think this was happening?
Oh man, this is probably this is
Early 2000s.
yeah, it's probably 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
Is when a lot of these albums were kind of coming out. they did the cover for Brand New, which he actually did you know that they got in trouble for this because they had a suit I don't know how they got a hold of it. I never asked Ryan, but they had actually gotten a hold of some sort of astronaut suit, and they got kind of in trouble for it. Like people were like, "How did you get an astronaut suit? Like, how did you?" So I don't know how he came across it, but anyway, like the idea of like all of these, kind of integrating photos and surrealism and that really like, and so learning to do that is when I started like kind of learning how to um use Photoshop in conjunction with photography. And then that when I started tattooing, the idea of scanning something and then and putting it in the computer and editing it and then reprinting it and then making stencils on top of that it was really cool. And then
Can't hear you, Corey.
yeah, I'm sorry guys, I'm just looking for the next one.
Okay.
So
Cool.
yeah, so that kind of like started the idea of using computer with the computer integrated with illustration. You know what I mean? And then and so that's what helped me get into see if I could change this real quick. It's weird if I can't see myself. I'm like having a hard time talking here. That really helped me get kind of my bearings on like integrating artwork into the computer and tweaking things and adjusting things. And then through doing graphic design, I ended up getting a side gig to brand a tattoo shop in Roseville. I'd been tattooing or not tattooing. I'd been doing graphic design on the side for forever. I was working construction and you know what I mean? I was doing everything. I was going to art school, and so I was getting all the side work, that I had kind of made friends with through Tower Records and all of that. And then yeah, I got hit up by an old, friend who was in a band who said, hey, my ex-girlfriend, wants to help branding a tattoo shop, and so I met with her and we just started talking art like immediately and I was showing her the work I was doing and I helped her, get a logo and we traded some tattoo work for the logo and along the way she knew that was when the housing market crashed. And I got laid off and I was still going to school and I was collecting unemployment. I was doing every little bit a piece of design work I could get my hands on, anything to make a couple extra bucks. And I remember I went in to get, we were still doing trade work at the time. I went in there to get tattooed and she asked if I was interested in tattooing. And that was the first time in my life I went, wait a minute, I can draw. Like like this is all I've wanted, is just to draw and make money at drawing, make my life, just get to draw. But I never thought in a million years I would tattoo, you know what I mean? It was so kind of surreal. So I just took it immediately because that's what you do when you want to make a living doing art is you just say yes to everything until you have so much work you don't know what to do with. And then you could start being very picky and choosy about, what projects you want to take on or didn't. Along that way, they started painting, right? And so they were painting a lot. And so this was, I don't know, this was right around, I don't know, the band Circus Survive had put out Juturna at the time, and I saw Iso Andrews' work, and I was like, that's it. Like that was the pinnacle of, that was everything, a culmination of everything I wanted to do. I was looking at his work. It was storytelling, it was surrealism, it was colorful, it was art, it was visceral, it was beautiful and grotesque, and I just went, I have to do this. I want to. And so I made it a mission of mine to, I had a person tell me a while ago that like, if you really admire somebody's work and you want to emulate them in a way, you should invest in them. You should invest in their work. And so that's exactly what I did. I went online and I started buying everything Iso Andrews had. And I would, and this is before I didn't even know how to paint. And I still don't know how to paint. I'm still learning. And I would buy his prints and I think I was living alone at the time and I would just I get home from the tattoo shop and I would just grab a beer and just hang out and just study these prints and try and figure out what the hell he was doing, you know what I mean? So this is also in lines of self-learned technique. It was like I could, now I know Iso, I could email him, and ask him, or I could ask him very kindly. He's such a nice dude. If you ever, you've interviewed him.
I had him on the show. Yeah. He was awesome.
He's such a soft-spoken guy.
He's so shy. It was so difficult. It was a difficult interview, but off of the camera, he was great. He's very shy.
he's such a shy guy, and he's very quiet, and I've gotten to know him throughout the years. I actually own the Hostage, which is let me show you. I own a painting from him. Me and my wife bought it.
Nice.
I'll show you. Let's see here. So he has a book called Poisonous Birds, and I would encourage you to, if you can find a copy of it, to get one. Let me see here. And it's just everything that I aspire to be as an artist, and then along the way I've gotten to know him, and briefly in a couple exchanges or whatever. But so I was at his show in LA, and this is when this piece was there, and it was just incredible to see in person. And
Incredible. Where does he live?
he lives in upstate New York now, I think.
Okay.
He used to live in LA. So this is the Hostage. So I own this painting. It's in our
Oh,
house.
wow.
And if you could see real closely, I don't know if the camera will pick it up. There's this ghostly kind of face in it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you could see it in the thing. But this hangs
Yeah.
in our house. It's 24 by 30.
Wow.
And so that was the first time I got to meet him. And let me see here. There's another piece that I love this painting, by the way, too.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a great book. I don't want to like get too in the weeds, but
Yeah.
this is a really fantastic book. And so yeah, I met him in LA, and I have, Sacramento is such a small kind of world that there's a lot of bands that come out of Sacramento, like the Deftones and all those guys, are here. And well, most of them are, well, I'd say half of them are still here. Chino lives in Portland, and I think Frank and Abe still live in Sac, but and their new guitarist, Lance, I've been friends with him for a while, and he was in bands when we were kids, and now he's playing guitar for them now, and it's really cool. Sacramento's such a small town, it's so cool. But music has always been a huge part of my life, and that's if I didn't love music and be in the music, I would not be where I am now. And so it's just a good example of like the idea of like no matter where you start, you can still end up anywhere. You know what I mean? You just have to say yes to things. Like, yes, I want to do this. I don't know how to do it, but I'll figure it out. Anyway, so as a funny story with Esau, so I bought his painting at the art show, and I had my buddy Sean, who he worked for Rock Nation at the time, and he's friends with like some of the guys from Circa and their management or whatever. Anyway, he was so excited that I got to buy a painting from him. He went over and like was like, "Hey, my buddy bought a painting from you. Come over and say hi." You know what I mean? And I was like, "Oh God, don't bring him over." But he came over, and he was such a cool dude. And then since then, it was like I went to the next time I saw him, I went to his retrospective show in Mesa, Arizona, and he recognized me and my wife.
Oh, wow.
In the crowd. There's tons of people there. We just happened to be walking through these people, and here he comes walking by, and we were like, he looked at us, and he was like, "Hey," and we were like, I was like, "Hey," like, "How's it going?" And it's weird when you talk to artists that you really admire. Is like, I don't want to talk art, but I want to talk art desperately. But I don't want to talk art, but I want to talk art like so badly. So I ended up chatting with him, and we ended up going to a bar, like an after party, and him and his wife or whatever were there, and he took the time to come over, and we just chatted it up. But he has this interesting style of talking, sometimes, because like I have a tendency to kind of ramble, and I would kind of put my foot in my mouth a couple times while we were talking, and he's so polite, but he's his way of like kind of like when it starts to get weird or awkward, he just will kind of go, and he'll just stare at you. You know what I mean? And then I go like, you know what I mean? I don't know what to do. You know what I mean? And it kind of makes me like try and retool it. But he's such a cool guy to get to talk to, and yeah, he's always been such a big inspiration in my career.
It's funny. I never made the connection, but looking at his paintings, I can totally see so much similarity in the types of shapes, the way that you use paint. Like this could be one of your bird flower types of things right here.
Yeah, I don't shy away from it whatsoever. I think that we as artists, all of us are influenced by like a number of people, you know what I mean? And everything that makes up like our quote unquote like style and technique, it's not like we just came up with that on our own. We're looking at tons of artists and artwork, and it's a culmination of all those things. I just so
Yeah.
happened to get to meet, you know, a big influence in my career, and it
Yeah.
really pointed me in this trajectory of like, I want to do beautiful, you know, grotesque kind of surreal imagery. You know, it was just something that I was just really attached to. And yeah, just a really
Yeah.
cool guy.
He
And
went to
yeah,
school with James Jean. He
he
and James
did,
Jean
which is
graduated
also
together.
it's funny that you said that because I have one of his books here too. I've been a
Oh
huge
yeah.
fan of James. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
I have his Fables book. And yeah, I didn't know they went to school in New York together.
Yeah, I didn't either. Esau mentioned it. I met him at the Richmond show. He painted, Jesse Smith does his during the convention, he sets up in the parking lot like 8 or 10 painters. He gives them all big canvases, like big
Dope.
boards, and they paint, and it's a charity, it's an art charity that they do, and they paint all weekend. And Esau painted, did an incredible painting that weekend, and that's how I ended up interviewing him. He really didn't want to be on camera, but off camera, I learned a lot, like that he went to school with James Jean. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, and from, you know, looking at Esau's work, you know, I've learned, you know, yeah, that's how I learned about like Joe Ruas and Aaron Horkey and some of those guys,
Yeah.
and just started to kind of get like dip my toes in a little bit of what the gallery scene was like, and you know, and I was just like, I was like, I want to do this. I got to do this. So like, you know, for me, you know, like tattooing is amazing and I love it, but I would love it at a certain point in my career. I kind of want to flip the scale and I want to paint as much as I tattoo and tattoo as much as I paint right now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the goal
Right.
for me. And I feel like that's the best way to express, you know, myself, and you know, it's like without, you know, another person's, you know, I'm a custom tattoo artist, you know, my whole life is doing artwork for other people, you know, and so getting to paint is a simple ability to get to do everything from start to finish myself. It's like I get to choose everything, you know, and that's really cool, and I think eventually that's where I would like to move things, you know, if I can. But
Yeah.
I, you know,
Yeah.
like anything else, I mean, you know, you hit a wall, and you know, I ended up going to art school halfway through before I started tattooing, and I got to work under what was it? A really awesome artist here. I could show you real briefly here. Who was? Let's see. Sorry, guys.
Dan, is your hand just still up, or have you had a question
It
this whole
is,
time?
but he's just been talking about so many interesting things.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
I know what I want to ask, but it's not a big deal because he has
Okay.
other things to say.
Okay, gotcha. I just didn't know if it was up from a previous question. Okay.
Sorry, I forgot to look at the hands. See, like the little hands
Nah,
like there.
yeah.
I was just like just rambling on. So this is Henry Ann. This was like probably another person that I worked, you know, who
Oh, I have that
studied
book.
with.
So good.
Yeah.
Can you spotlight?
Give me one hot second.
Yeah.
Okay,
There we go. Yeah, if you guys don't have this book, you should get it.
This
It's amazing.
this in particular is so. This was one of the biggest tools that I use all the time now. Everything. He was really adamant. So well, a little bit of well, let me show you, and then I can just like talk about it a little bit about his artwork. I love to. So he was putting this book together when I was going to art school, and I encouraged him to put it like on Amazon, and he didn't know what Amazon was, which was at the time I was like, what? How do you not know what Amazon is? But I love it because they have these, you know, it's 20 minutes, 20 minutes, you know what I mean? And he's showing you how quickly he can get a gesture. 10 minutes, Vine charcoal, 10 minutes.
Amazing.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And he had a way. So this was also a thing that I really liked. And he would really, you know, he would try and push us all to, you know, every time the pose changes when you're drawing from life. I drew a lot of these models. These were all models I was drawing in college as well. He would really recommend that, you know, he goes, don't flip the page. Every time the model would change poses, you would hear everybody's page flip over. And he was like, stop. Like, we're just doing 5-minute poses. Like, fill up the page, you know, fill it up, you know, and then change the page, you know, like fill up these things. And anyway, the book goes on and on. And it kind of goes from like small, you know, small illustrations all the way up to, you know, these like much more. I've drawn that guy a ton of times. and it's like an hour and a half, and then it goes into like 40 minutes, and then the longer the book goes, the longer the poses. So then
Yeah.
it gets into like longer, 2 hour studies, head studies and hand studies and everything else. But this is a fantastic book. It's
Yeah.
Henry Ann's Figure Drawing Techniques and Tips. I would recommend this highly, for anybody who's interested in figure drawing. Figure drawing is if you want to know the easiest way to expedite your drawing abilities, take figure drawing classes. It is the fastest way you can expedite learning how to draw. So that, and then
Yeah.
Does he
quick.
explain the different techniques for increasing your speed on the gestures?
Well, it forces you. Excuse me, guys. I'm sorry. It forces you to. Let me see here. It really forces you to pick out things that are important in a pose, right? So if somebody is sitting there and I only have 5 minutes to draw them, immediately, you have to really analyze like what's important, what's not, and how do I get this gesture done very quickly? And yeah, the tools do change. Sometimes, you would use vine charcoal, and then different hardness of charcoal pencils, and then, a big part of it was like learning how to sharpen a, pencil very, a big part of drawing. And there's different ways of illustrating, but the idea that like, let me change my, he would push this idea that I use all the time now, which is instead of like, let's see here. So instead of like just simply, so this is detail, right? This is for shape. So the idea was like when you would start, you would go, if you want to find gestures and shapes, so like we want to draw like waves, right? So we're essentially we're drawing with our with our hands, so it's a lot of this, or I'm sorry, we're drawing with our arm. That's the idea, right? And then when we want to do details, that's when we do this. This is for like the corners of the eyes and the nostrils and little divots and little things. But for the most part, we really want to work on just like quickly. And so he would very quickly just kind of, grab something and just, he just start going for it, real quick. And he would identify like all these shadows, and he would, so it was funny to watch him. I was really young when I wouldn't say really young, but he had this great ability to establish things very quickly. And the way he would do it was he would quickly find the silhouette. So if he was doing a head, for example, he would mark out the silhouette of the head very quickly, and then he would hit the core shadow very efficiently. And so, in if you guys are familiar with a core shadow, this is a core shadow is very simply like the plane at which, if you're looking at a cylinder, it's where light hits the very tip of it, right? So it's like it's where your darkest darks and your lightest lights meet. So like when you're drawing, like it might be like this, kind of area. He would mark it out very quickly, and then he would use basically a paper towel he would get from the bathroom, and he would fold it into this weird like little triangle, and then he would grab the core shadow and he would just push it, and it would create all your midtones. And it was like instant, you know what I mean? And I remember we were all sitting in class, and we'd all before he would start every class, he would sit down. He was from China, so he had like a very a heavy accent. He would sit down with everybody and go, okay, I'm going to do a demo. And he would show us very quickly. And then he would grab this little paper towel and he would pull it across, and he would make this core shadow. He would make this core shadow shape. Like, I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can find like
That explains also how he's willing to lose a lot of edges. So like in a torso, like what I love is like in his quick sketches, how some things are like not rendered, but the forms are very well described, and then other areas it looks like he just like drug his hand across it, and it just gives this atmosphere to the piece, like so like the whole like the torso will just get swept out, but then everything else is forward. It's so cool, man.
It was just incredible, man. The guy it was so funny. So we'd all be standing in like a huddle behind him and all watching him sit there and draw. And then he would take this little tool and he would just take the core shadow and he'd just drag it across the face, and it would go from core shadow to mid-tone in almost like reflected light, all in one stroke. And you would hear the whole class go, oh, Like, you know what I mean? It would make this like everyone would just be like, oh my God, you know what I mean? Like, what am I even doing here? You know? And man, he was just such a that guy was so incredibly like genuinely talented. You don't meet people that are genuinely talented that just have like it, you know. Very few people have it. I think most of it is like learned, but he just for some reason he had this weird like he just had a weird way of like thinking about art and doing it in a very non-traditional way, but in a way. And it was funny because I would tell other teachers about his methods and they would all kind of like, meh, well, I mean, he doesn't really, you know, that's not you know what I mean. I mean, you could do it that way, but that's not kind of how you do it, you know what I mean. But he was so good at it, you know, that it really so he originally he was an engineer from China. He had an engineering degree before he even came to the United States.
Hmm.
And then he comes to the United States and it's like, I want to get a degree in art. And he was in art school for, I think, just a few months before somebody saw him and was like, no, you're just going to go right to teaching. You know what I mean? They just shot him right up to the top and he just immediately started teaching. So it was like incredible to go to San Francisco and watch this guy come in, very friendly, super nice guy, you know, and he would, you know, chat with everybody. And okay, we're going to do it. We sit there and draw for 3 or 4 hours. And then he'd go, okay, see you guys later. And he'd get on his little bike and he'd ride home. You know what I mean? And it was just like, it
Yeah.
was just the coolest thing, you know what I mean? I don't know. I was just like, man, I wish I could ever, you know, one day I could be that humble and cool and give such good information and all of that, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that was it was so there was a couple people that really changed the way I approach things, you know, changing the position in your hand and drawing with your arm is such a fundamental tool that I you know, that's the thing that really hinders people from when you're using the iPad, right? You know, you're stuck into detail focused. You're not shapes focused, you're detail focused. So the only way you can really get shapes out of an iPad is to really, you know, make your brush very much bigger and then kind of work in silhouettes kind of, you know, that's the only way you can do it. But if you're working on tracing paper like I was showing you, you know, you can get very nice fluid shapes. You know, you can do waves and you can do branches and trees, and you know, you can get these really good shapes, and it's all using your arm, you know. And then when you're starting to tighten things up, then you go from your arm to your wrist. And so I always think about that when I draw, you know, use your arm for general shapes and your wrist for detail.
Yeah.
And so I hope that helps, you know. And you know, those are something that I use every time I draw, you know, if I can.
Yeah. Yeah. Dan, did you still have a question from earlier? You
I
wanted to
do,
that?
yeah.
Thanks for waiting, Dan. Sorry.
You're good. So, speaking of books and sort of investing in the people that you, I have a similar approach where like if I really like an artist, I'll try to find somebody I want to pull stuff from. I won't just like look at their stuff on Instagram. I'll find stuff by them, books, prints, paintings, what have you, and I'll try to make that purchase so that I have an opportunity to get in and look at it. Like you can't see it, but I have this. It's one of my favorite paintings, but it's a Tom Strom painting, and it's just like it's just a a street with a bunch of bubble frogs and stuff like that. But I could look at that on Instagram all day. But I have the biggest print that I could have purchased from him, and I get to see all these different little line weight details and sort of like how he's doing a blend with watercolor and things like that, and sort of how he's making his shape designs and sort of all the different curves that he's doing, and how he's stacking different shapes to get a good composition and stuff like that. So I really agree and encourage other people to buy other people's art so that you have not just an opportunity to support somebody that you really like, but to really dig in
Yeah.
and stare at stuff and sort of let it influence you, to one degree or another. So on that note, because I haven't ever found any prints or books by you, have you ever thought about putting a book out, like a book of your sketches? Maybe not like some fully rendered designs, that would be really cool. But to see some of your like all those process videos you have on your Instagram, it would be really cool to see just those line drawings in a book as like
Man.
sketches. And this is something that Mike Moses does. I'm sure you're familiar with his work.
The Drown Town, man.
Yeah, the Drowntown is one of my favorite artists. Not you guys share as far as like your shape to not you're not the same,
We're
but
both
like
very illustrative focused.
very
Yeah, for
illustrative,
sure.
very comic book influenced. And so I gravitate towards those types of artists a lot.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of his books that I put on my iPad. And so those are, you know, a really nice influence for me. I think he's coming out with another book. I'm not sure, but would you ever consider putting out like a book of your sketches?
Man, that would be really cool to do a book of sketches. You know, man, I feel like my life is so crazy at the moment. I'm like, you know, I tattoo full time, and so I'm
Sure.
always drawing for somebody else, and then right now me and my wife are remodeling our house, which we started during COVID, you know what I mean? And we're still not done with it, you know what I mean? And so, you know, you know, the biggest thing that I'm working on right now is to get our house finished, and then immediately I really want to do a solo show. I really want to do another solo show. So I did the last one I did was I think in 2018. That I had a lot of fun doing, and that's my goal right now is to finish up the house hopefully by the end of the year, and then next year I'll be just trying to paint my face off, you know what I mean? Like, and try and get another show together. If I can collect enough material, I would love to, you know, it'd be great to put out a book. You know, the only thing this is really embarrassing, but I'll show you guys anyway. So when I was apprenticing, because I wanted to be, you know, I wanted to be a comic book illustrator while I was apprenticing, I actually drew, excuse me, sorry if it's loud. I actually did like a small comic book um, that was a long time ago while I was
Nice.
apprenticing. So that I wasn't busy at the time. I was just like apprenticing, but I drew this comic book like as man. It says yeah 2010,
Hmm.
and it was all black and white or whatever. And I just never really um, I
Did
never
you?
really that was the closest I ever got to really publishing anything, you know, as far as like
That's
a
awesome.
book.
That
But
was
Where can
great.
I get that?
Yeah. What do
and
you? Can you get it anywhere or no?
no, no, no. So this is the sad part of. Oh, and also I'll show you since I have this camera up. This is my last painting that I just finished this one that for
Oh,
our art show.
nice.
And
Beautiful.
so this was and I made this still life basically, and then this that you see here is this is actually like a tube from Home Depot that I just stuffed with wires, and I
Hmm.
bent it and you know and spray painted it like a black, and then integrated it into the still life that I had made. And
Nice.
so that's yeah, so it was for Year of the Snake. It was for another you know, an art show. um
Beautiful.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry, what was I
Yeah.
sorry, what the
But
hell
yeah,
was
we're
what were we
we're
talking about?
talking about making books or having time
Oh yeah,
to do
okay.
that.
So it's like crazy reality check when it comes to thinking you're going to make a comic book, which is uh one, the amount of crazy amount of time it takes to actually illustrate something like that. And it gave me like a huge perspective as far as like how much time it goes to making sequential artwork and telling stories and everything. The problem with it is you can, you know, there's tons of websites that you can go to self-publish your own books, and I'm sure Mike Moses probably uses some of those to, and then he can distribute himself online. Um, but when it comes to comic books, I realized that like if you're not on a label, or you're not on a publisher, it's like good luck, you know. Like
Yeah.
I was apprenticing, and I you know, I got 250 issues made, and I was like, man, I'm gonna sling them in all my local comic book stores. This is gonna be so cool. And I went to like the first 3 or 4 comic book stores, and I was like, what do you think? And they're like, yeah, we'll buy two. And I was like,
Hmm.
all right, you know, it's like $3. You know what I mean? I was like,
Hmm.
and it just hit me out of nowhere, like, oh, I'm gonna be riding the struggle bus for a while, you know.
Mhm.
And so, you know, I definitely want to get back into storytelling at some point and publish like a full arc. You know, I have ideas for an arc that'll be probably something I do after the next painting show I do. But I'd really like to get back into comics, and then the goal is to like, you know, try and put together at least like, you know, two what is that? 22 pages times 3. Um, as proof of concept and ship and pitch it to an image or a dark horse or something like that and see if they'll pick it up. And then you get distribution, and that's where you actually can make a couple bucks, is actually with distribution. It's like, there's no way you can like
Well,
publish a book and
what
then,
about merch? Because like
oh,
merch makes
merch.
more sense with like comic books, I think. But
Yeah,
like when you're
we
talking
do.
about it, it's like, yeah, you have a comic book, but then like nowadays, like it became more popular to do like web comics and
Yep.
just like release one panel every
Yeah.
week. And then at the end of the month or at the end of 2 months, be like, oh yeah, by the way, the comic book is on the website now. You can order it.
Yeah.
You can
Well, it
download
depends.
Mhm.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. You can definitely go that route, and it totally makes sense. And for I have friends who do little zines and comics and stuff. And you know, uh, you can do the online stuff and everything, but I think what, at least if I'm a collector of art, I like something I can like hold and feel and it's tangible and stuff. And so like I know what you're saying as far as like you could do it once a week and then compile it into a book and then release it at the end. And
Yeah,
so I
like
don't know. I just
I,
haven't really gone down that road to know exactly what
I
the right method is.
understand what you're thinking in that sense because I don't care about the digital copy either. I only want the physical copy.
Hmm.
But all the digital stuff, all the content that's on the internet, any optional thing that you offer that's downloadable, it's just content that's available that supports buying the actual product.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Like I definitely would like to go back to it's something that the Neon Tiger, the tattoo studio I own, is trying to develop as a web store that we can start releasing a lot more prints and artwork through a different channel, as well as like merch, things like that would be really cool. The other thing that I'm working on right now is to all the murals that I was showing you guys earlier is to have a QR code that's posted on the wall at the bottom or from of each mural that I've done that takes them directly to the website of the tattoo shop, and that
Yeah.
way it's kind of a hub, and especially they're all in restaurants, so there's just tons of foot traffic, and it's just this untapped resource of people who will come in and have the ability to like we're like, oh, I like the artwork on the wall, oh, there's a QR code, and they scan it, it takes them to the website, oh, they tattoo, and they
Sell
might
prints or whatever else.
they might
Yeah.
really like one of the artists at the shop and get tattooed by them. So I think there's a lot more like business, there's a lot more stuff you could do business wise, and yeah, I would like to publish more stuff. That'd be really cool. I just don't like I said, I feel like a jack of all trades right now. I feel like I'm just like I'm doing everything and I'm not really honing in onto anything specifically at the moment, and I'm hoping to kind of dig my way out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're a little over 2 hours in. Does anyone have any
I
kind of
do have
closing
another
ideas,
question.
thoughts? Okay, go for it, Dan.
I have one more question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So I really like your as a lot of people do, the flower birds kind of thing.
Hmm.
So like when you're coming up with something like that sort of surrealist, and I know you talked about it before, like, how you sort of imagine those things, but to combine those items together, a flower through the bird, how does that sort of work? And you don't have to spend a ton of time on it. I know we've been kind
Sure.
of on this for a
Well,
long time, but
the
yeah.
easy thing that I learned was like, so it's this sounds really cheesy, but like the idea of like the life cycle of the bird is something you have to think about. Like, I'm thinking about like, when it comes to like the storytelling aspects and everything else. Well, I'm trying to think of like how would this exist in real life? You know what I mean? And like, what would it eat? And what would its babies look like? You know what I mean? Like, if it's a bird, would it have eggs? And like, with those, you know what I mean? It starts to really kind of stack up like the weirdness of how far down the rabbit hole you want to go with some of the imagery. But the one thing that I learned is that like, I think when it comes to something surreal, you have to show, especially when you're putting flowers on birds, it's like you have to really make sure that you have to show that there's a distinct connection where the body of the bird is integrated with the flower. Otherwise, it just looks like a flower with a bird halfway behind it, like the flower is in the way of the bird. So you're really trying to think of those aspects. It's like if I want to push that imagery, I have to kind of show, through imagery that it is that these are connected, and at least one of those birds has to show that the body inserts into the flower. And then after that, then I can, if I do multiple birds in the same image, I can, if the flower kind of, if you can't see that insertion into the flower, if that makes sense, you still can kind of find it somewhere else, and you're like, oh, all the birds have flowers for heads, which is kind of a silly, it's like it's like one of those things where it's like it's cool in theory, and I like that. That's kind of been my like little shtick, and I've gotten to like paint it and tattoo it, and I've done a ton of tattoos of it, which is really cool, and I love that it resonates with people. But it's tough to, it's tough to kind of branch out past that. You know what I mean? Like, what else could I
Yeah.
do? And I find myself doing that a lot more, where I'm like, well, I'll just replace the head of something and put something else in its place, and it's like,
Right.
well, you can only do that so many times before you kind of feel.
Well,
But I do feel like it's something that you can integrate into all of your art somehow. Like my
Yeah.
my banner has it, you know what I mean? Where it's like it's a tiger, but I have these flower birds kind of flying around it. I try and integrate it into a lot of things to hopefully make a connection where it's like, oh, that's the guy that does the thing, you know what I mean? So having something like that um in your repertoire of work, I think helps trying to hone in on something that's you kind of uniquely yours that you can kind of reproduce and repeat. Um, and we
the,
see it with so many other tattoo artists that they will do these things, and I could just tell, based on like what it is, who, it's like, oh, I know that flower because this artist does that style of flower. I don't even need to know who did it. I can pretty much tell. So I think those are distinct ways of, in this industry, kind of, because it is kind of competitive in the sense of like there's so many people in this industry now, it's become this like billion-dollar industry and everything. How do you separate yourself from this big crowd, and so that's why I'm really trying to push this idea of drawing things, like eh, people are getting so hung up on pulling imagery off a long line and tracing it, that you just it's like the person down the street is doing the exact same thing. So
what you
what
said is very
separates you?
important. Sorry. The whole thing about evolution. So knowing the lifeline of whatever it is that you're portraying,
Hmm.
if you know the lifeline of a bird and you know the lifeline of a flower, you can mesh the two together, because then you
Correct.
also know the anatomy of that thing and how it changes over time. And so you know the range of motion. So you know
Yeah, so
what
I
can fit together.
exactly, so and sometimes it's just contrasting elements, right? So like I was thinking like, well, for example, like it's like, well, okay, so if the bird has a flower for a head, that's cool, but what would it eat? And I thought, well, what's the opposite of a flower? Like I would think like oil. You know what I mean? Something that's not beautiful, something that's like gross. So there was imagery that I was playing with the idea of it like feeding baby birds and like dripping oil onto them, and this idea of having this beautiful bright flower but this black, ink kind of falling out of them in certain places, and kind of playing with this contrast of elements. So like sometimes surrealism works really well with that, where you're just kind of playing with the idea of like, if you have something that's very beautiful, well, contrast it with something very dark, but that then kind of synergizes with it in some way. So it's like if I do something really dark, I want to do something really bright next to it, and that way it kind of, you know what I mean? It kind of works that way. So not every image is like that. Sometimes it's just a one-off image, but the flower bird concept is just something that I've just been, just keeps coming back, and people ask for it. I tattooed it a ton of times now, and it just has kind of gotten into my repertoire. But I would definitely love to explore that in different various stages, like we were talking about, the kind of different various stages of its lifeline somehow. But then also you get caught up in the idea of the like, okay, well, if I'm just doing flowers with birds for heads, then I can't have flowers in any of my paintings, because now it kind of contradicts what I'm painting. You know what I mean? So it's like you find yourself getting stuck in these weird, what do you call it? Like a, where it's just like, it's like, you have to like, So that's what like when I paint them now, it's like, well, birds are on branches, but I make sure I never put any sort of flowers or blossoms on a branch. I could put like berries and other things, but if as soon as I put a flower on a branch, well, then it takes you out of it because you're like, well, how is a flower on a bird and also on a branch? It doesn't make any sense. So
I think
for the illusion to play and work, it has to be kind of solely its own thing, you know.
That's
you
a good
could get
point.
away with
Yeah.
it as long as the other flowers in the picture were a different species, like
You
forget
could
me
do that
not
route, yeah.
instead of
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many different ways you can approach it. And, you know, so I'm open to all those things and I'm trying to kind of learn. And I think the next sort of surrealism things, I'm like, okay, let's get away from just taking the head off of one thing and putting something in its place. You know what I mean? That it worked okay this time, but let's not be that guy. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm also trying to do is kind of like keep myself in that, keep myself grounded in that way where I'm just like, oh, he's the guy that just takes the head off of animals and puts something else in its place. It's like, I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah. Understand that for sure. Well, cool, man. This has been awesome, man. I really appreciate you doing so much research and planning for like what you wanted to share. That's a lot of people don't do that, so that's nice. And
Hey,
the
Jake.
fact that you're willing to take so much time.
Yeah, well, I just want to say, I really appreciate what Fireside does, and you guys are doing a great job, and it's really cool to watch you guys, host all these people that, you get to like get a little inside look into these artists' lives, and just the simple fact that you guys are interested enough to like have me come on and just ramble about all this stuff is so cool, and I think you're doing really good work, and
Thank you.
I support you for the fullest. I'd love to come on anytime, man, and whatever I could do to support you guys and help out.
Do a
I love this
critique night.
platform. I think you guys are
Hmm.
crushing it. So
Well, thank
yeah,
you.
man, I really appreciate you guys having me on the program, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Come
Thanks a lot.
back and do a critique night, man. We'd
Oh
love
I would
yeah,
love
we
to.
should.
for one of
Yeah,
those.
yeah, definitely. We'll reach
Awesome.
out. That'd be great.
And
We do
if
it.
you guys ever are interested in, I mean, definitely, being in owning a tattoo shop now for almost 13 years, if you guys are ever interested in understanding those aspects of like, how do you manage other artists and how do you, operate a business at the same time and try and encourage people to do, you know what I mean? I think there's content there, I think
Sure.
as well. And
Yeah.
hopefully it will help other shop owners in a certain way. So yeah, there's so much content, dude. And I'm just glad you guys are doing stuff like this. And it's been a pleasure.
Well, yeah, thank you. It has, and we'll definitely reach out for both of those things. A critique night would be a lot of fun. Those are great. But we
Oh, yeah.
do drawing challenges each month, and then people turn in their drawing challenges, and we'll just turn them loose on you, and you just you do
Or rip
critiques,
them apart.
rip them apart.
Rip 'em
And
the
we do
fuck apart.
we have another night each month, or
I'll be like that guy on the
bi-weekly.
thing where he's like, afuera, afuera, afuera. You know?
We have another night we call Mindset Mondays, which is more business and mindset related. So yeah, I'd love to have you to do a couple of those things. Would be great.
Absolutely, man. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks.
very
Good to
much.
see you again. Yeah, everybody have a good night.
See you guys. All right, you too. Thanks, guys.
All right.
See ya.
All right. All right. Thanks for spending a little time with us. I hope you got something out of that. Like I said, if you would like to be a part of these discussions going forward, we do these at least once every single month, along with Mindset Mondays and drawing challenges and lots of other events in the club. I'd love to have you try it out and see if it might be something that helps you grow your tattoo skill set. What else? I think that's it. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.